Welcome to City Hall. We'll get started this morning with our invocation and the Pledge of Allegiance. Rusty Stowe is here. He's the senior pastor at Exchange Avenue Baptist Church. Rusty will lead us in the invocation. Afterwards, I'll ask Councilman Pete White to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Would everyone please stand?
Father, what a glorious day it is that you've shared with us once again. We just thank you for the opportunity to have another day to be the people that you want us to be and to do the things that you'd have us to accomplish. This morning, Father, I pray for Mayor Cornett, and I pray for the rest of the council members, that you would give them clarity in the decisions they make, that you would give them unity as they provide leadership to our great city. Father, we just pray for them as individuals, that you would help them in their decision-making. We pray for their families today, that you'd build a hedge of protection around them and keep them safe from all the evil that's so very real in our world today. God, we pray that we might be the city that you want us to be, that lighthouse that shines a light for the world to see. We pray that our nation would once again come back to you, that we would be one nation under God, indivisible. And Father, we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'd like Mike Pugliese and Rick Kane to come forward. We are so grateful to Mike and Platt College. Mike is the president of Platt College. They are providing the funding of a one-year financial sponsorship of the downtown trolley, and so it allows our citizens to ride the downtown trolley absolutely at no cost to them and through the sponsorship of Platt College. Mike, we're very grateful, and I wanted to thank you. And let's show our appreciation to Platt College. As part of that, I thought I'd let both of them have a chance to speak, but first I thought I'd let Rick kind of talk about the downtown trolley and the ideas of moving around and why it's important to the citizens.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, it certainly gives us an opportunity to promote walkability in the downtown area, and we kind of talk about the trolley as being a way to expedite that walkability downtown. We're pleased with the partnership with Platt College to support it, and again, the mayor mentioned, I want to emphasize, through their contribution, the trolley will operate from July 1st of this year through June 30th of next year, and it's absolutely free. So we encourage people to come out, and Mayor, I can say over the first 2 weeks of operation, we've seen a significant increase in ridership. So people like it when it's free. That's right.
So where can people get on the trolley? If they come downtown, where would they look for?
We've got major stops at all the activity sites downtown throughout Bricktown. It goes up to the Memorial site and then comes over to makes a connection at our transit center so that if they're riding our services, they can then connect with the trolley to circulate downtown and then comes through the downtown core. So look for a trolley bus stop sign and you'll see our vehicles running around downtown throughout the day from essentially 10 in the morning until late in the evening.
And roughly how long is it between?
We are targeting about 15 minutes between trips. The challenge is going to be as we begin our Project 180 and we start tearing up the streets downtown, that's going to put a challenge to it. And frankly, our increase in ridership has also slowed it down a little bit. So, but we'll see how it goes. We're real excited about it. And again, we appreciate the partnership with Platt College.
That's great. And Mike, I'll give you an opportunity to talk about Platt College, but also why you believe strongly in the trolley.
Well, thank you. It was a great opportunity for us to promote Platt College in the community, being in business for over 30 years here, and help the community. And that's one of the reasons that we did it. So we're one of the largest private schools in the state with over 2,000 students. So thank you.
Well, again, let's show our appreciation to both of these gentlemen. Thanks very much. We really appreciate it. Thanks, Rick. 4 times a year, we ask Chamber President Roy Williams to come over and present to the City Council an update on the Chamber of Commerce activities, and also gives the Council an opportunity to ask Roy questions. Roy, would you come forward and give us your quarterly report? Thanks very much for being here.
Thank you, Mayor. Members of Council, City Manager, thank you very much for the opportunity to come before you. There are about 6 areas I just want to touch on very briefly. I'll be very brief in my remarks and certainly be available for any questions anybody might have. Since I was last here, roughly 90 days ago, I wanted to comment on a couple things. One is on May the 3rd through the 5th, we took about 60 attendees statewide to the Bio Show in Chicago. And we had a very successful, at least from our perspective and from local bio companies' perspective, exhibit at that show. We had a lot of our local bioscience companies have face-to-face meetings with venture capitalists, angel investors, potential partners, potential customers. So we're really getting traction in the whole bioscience industry sector. So we were really pleased with it. This is about the 6th year I think we've been doing this, and it grows every year. As well, along that same line, we're updating our bioscience strategic plan. We work with the Battelle Life Sciences Group to that end, and very shortly we will be releasing that 5-year strategic plan. A second area has to do, and it also kind of ties in with bio, is entrepreneurship. We certainly believe at the Chamber that the key to our economic growth in the future is not only growing existing companies and recruiting companies, but helping foster the startup of new companies here, entrepreneurs. And we're really pleased to have this new relationship with the city, this new financial partnership along with I2E. Since our last time here, I2E received the $1 million matching grant that will now allow us to have an executive in residence program and really help startup companies in the region. I also had the privilege, since last time I was here, to be the Master of Ceremonies at the Governor's Cup Tri-State competition in Las Vegas a couple months ago, in which a number of our Oklahoma companies had a chance to compete, and in which they did win. So we were really pleased to see that happen, too. So our companies are not only doing a good job here in Oklahoma, but they're model companies nationally as well. And as well as we continue to raise money for our 5-year economic development strategy Forward Oklahoma City 4, entrepreneurship is a key financial component of that as well. Also, since last year, we exhibited at the International Council of Shopping Centers, May 23rd through the 26th in Las Vegas. Oklahoma City really created a lot of buzz at the show, primarily because of our economy. Very few other cities there have the economic environment that we currently have, and we saw a noticeable trend where retailers wanted to meet with us instead of us wanting to meet with retailers. So we had retailers coming to our booth wanting to know what was going on here, wanting to know what opportunities they potentially were missing by not being in our market, and we certainly were pleased to share with them those opportunities. As you know, this particular week, Thursday I think it is, Horizon is breaking ground on the Outlet Shopping Mall. You're seeing a lot of new retail in the Class and Curve. And so we're seeing a lot of good retail activity, which I assure you is not happening nationally. So we're very, very fortunate to have that going on here. So we continue to see more good news coming our way. Another program we just completed is our summer internship program. This is our 5th year of putting together a summer program, which that simply means that all of the companies, businesses, organizations who have interns can enroll them in the Chamber's summer intern program, in which we immerse them into the community and connect them with the community. When they're working at their jobs or their employers, they get to see hands-on work sites and jobs, but this exposes them to Oklahoma City and what Oklahoma City has to offer. We've grown this program to over 300 interns during the summer. And another thing that is really interesting to us is we have worked long and hard on trying to keep graduates here. Now we're attracting graduates from outside. We had over 53 universities represented this year in this summer program. So obviously a lot of students from across the U.S. are getting exposed to this internship program and seeing opportunities in Oklahoma City. So it is really getting some traction as well. And we're noticing a significant jump from our surveying of these students before the internship program to after the internship program who are truly looking at staying in Oklahoma and truly changing their mind about the opportunities in Oklahoma. Very quickly, as all of you know, the legislature recently concluded, and while it was a pretty tough year financially, there were some highlights. We continued to work away at really one of our top legislative agenda items, and that was workers' comp reform, and that happened. And then another significant thing happened, and we really spearheaded this over the years, and that's the Quality Events Bill. That's a really crucial incentive program for keeping and growing quality events in Oklahoma. We see it here, especially in the horse shows and the river activities, Big 12 activities, et cetera, but our competition has incentive programs for these really big economic impact projects, events that occur, and we've got to compete in order to keep those. So we're excited that that bill passed, and in the future we'll be able to leverage that to continue to grow shows and to grow activities here. And as well, we're developing our priorities for the 2011 legislative session right now. A final thing is, as you are well aware of, we've had a number of high-profile meetings and conferences in Oklahoma City recently, and that is a key component of our image development strategy, is to bring opinion leaders, corporate executives, peers, et cetera, to Oklahoma City and see what is going on in this city. We recently hosted the Oklahoma Aerospace Conference, and we hosted 2 International Economic Development Council conferences here. Some of you attended those and were involved in that. And then finally, we were involved with the U.S. Conference of Mayors, as I'm sure all of you are quite aware, because you all were involved in that as well. Our staff really was in charge of all the host activities. 4 major events. We raised more than $1.25 million from the private sector to produce these events, and I believe those made lasting impressions on all of our visitors, and I know the mayor has heard many, many comments. So with that, I'll give you 2 quick dates. September the 8th is Metro 50, just remind you of that, another supporting event for our entrepreneurs. And on September the 17th, we will have our 6th annual inner-city visit. A little twist to our inner-city visit this year. This year, we're going to visit Oklahoma City and look at all those things we did at all these other cities and to see what kind of progress Oklahoma City has made toward these things, either good or bad, and get our leadership kind of all focused on those kind of core issues that we're all interested in. So that concludes my report, Mayor. I'd be glad to.
Roy, thank you very much. Any questions for Roy? Comments?
Just, is the internship program, are they all paid interns?
The summer ones or the ones at the company?
Summer.
The employers have to pay $75 to enroll summer interns. Most of the interns, though, when they're doing their internship, not the summer, most of them are paid.
Okay.
Probably 90-95% of them are paid.
I again, just want to commend the Chamber on looking ahead with that program. And as it grows, it's one of the most, I think, important things we can do in attracting young people to take a second look at Oklahoma City, and I think this does an excellent job.
I agree. I attend every one of those sessions, and it's just phenomenal to see the energy and the enthusiasm and the excitement of these college students as they learn more and more about what's going on in Oklahoma City and the opportunities that are here. It really surprises.
Any other questions or comments for Roy? All right, Roy, thanks again very much for coming down.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Appreciate the work of the Chamber. We're on item 3B through 3G on the council agenda. This is a series of appointments. I'll entertain a motion. All right, we have a motion and a second. Any comments or questions? All right, cast your votes. Those appointments are approved. We're on to item 4. This is the Journal of Council Proceedings. Item 4A is to receive the Journal of Council Proceedings for July 6th, and item 4B is to approve the Journal of Council Proceedings for June 29th. Comments or questions on the journals? All right, cast your votes. Journals are approved. And we're going to item 5. This is request for uncontested continuances.
Mayor, a couple this morning, starting on page 34. On page 34, under item 8, I-1, B, 1333 Northeast 10th Street. We ask that that be stricken, that there's a new owner. And then moving to item 8, J1 on page 35. Item B, 4720 South Drexel Avenue. We ask that that be stricken. We will rework that for additional violations. Item E, 2115 North Callum Avenue. We ask that that be stricken. The owner secured. Item J, 2427 Northwest 11th Street. We ask that that be stricken. The owner has secured. Item L, 1915 Northwest 12th Street. We ask that that be stricken. The owner has secured. Item N, 2100 Northeast 14th Street. We ask that that be stricken. We'll rework that as dilapidated. Item P, 1008 Southwest 31st Street. We ask that that be stricken. We'll rework for additional violations. Item S, 2804 Southeast 55th Street. We ask that that be stricken. We'll rework for additional violations. And finally, item T, 2104 Northwest 62nd Street. We ask that that be stricken. The owner has secured.
All right, any other requests for uncontested continuances? I'll recess the council meeting, convene as the Oklahoma City Municipal Facilities Authority. Like there are 9 items. We have a motion and a second. Any comments or questions on the MFA?
Your Honor, I've got a few minor questions.
All right.
On that MFA, item B, it shows the location is Ward 2, and I believe it's Ward 8.
You are correct, sir.
If it was Ward 2, I've been taking an awful lot of questions from people out there. I'd rather shift over to Sam, but it is Ward 8, I think.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. On C2, that's Pennsylvania Avenue, Northwest 164th to 178th. I wonder if we've got any idea of the schedule of that one yet.
Dennis?
Councilman, I don't, but I'll be glad to get that for you.
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you, Your Honor.
You're welcome.
We have Mr. Freeman here to give us a short presentation on the budget on item E.
Okay. Excuse me, Your Honor. I have just one quick question on item D before Greg starts his presentation. And that is a contract to provide some assistance for our employees. And I was curious if we could get a brief summary of the kind of assistance that they do provide, whether it's alcohol treatment or whatever, and then some idea of how many of our employees, gross numbers, that participate in the program.
I'd be happy to get that for you, sir.
Thank you, Your Honor. I apologize for that later.
Basically, what we wanted to do, each year we approve the budgets for the PPA and the MFA, and so we're going to do just a brief presentation. It's a significant amount of money, and so we wanted to make sure that we explain what we're doing with that. When you look at the MFA, it's really, the MFA provides support for city services, and it gives us some flexibility in being able to use multi-year contracts and to help us accumulate funding for reserves and for specific services that support our operations. Looking at the revenue sources that we have for the MFA, you can see that we've broken out insurance because it's such a large portion. The 2 primary revenue sources for our insurance program, and this is the insurance program for active employees, and the 2 primary sources are the contributions from the employer, from the city, and the contributions from the employees. So a majority of that insurance category is actually a transfer out of our operating funds or other trust funds. If you look at the transfers from various funds, as well as the portion of the insurance that is a transfer from operating funds, about 2/3 of the MFA budget is supported by transfers from operating funds where those operating budgets have already been approved. And that's usually why we don't make as much of an issue with the budget for the MFA, but because it is such a significant amount, we wanted to make sure that we highlight some of the operations that are supported, in this case the services that are supported. On the expenditure summary, again, health insurance is the largest portion at about 62%, followed by risk management. The largest portion of the risk management category is workers' compensation. The information technology supports some of our communication services and the technology services and the business system support. The advanced capital funding provides for advanced funding for the general obligation bond program, and we'll look at each one of those in a little bit more detail here. On the health insurance program, as I mentioned, basically the contributions that come from employees and the employer are taken through our payroll system. Most of those are through city funds. There are some trust funds that participate in the city's health insurance program. The total amount of that is about $47 million with about a $2.5 million unbudgeted reserve.
Craig, may I just ask a very quick question?
Sure.
In terms of the size of the pie piece, how over the last couple of years has that grown? It represented 61%, I think, in your previous slide. Is that number?
I'm not sure how it's changed over the years. The MFA has a lot of swings in the amounts in there, and like, for instance, in this last year, compared to last year, we did make one change where we've taken reserves And instead of putting reserves that are for future obligations within the current year budget, we've taken those off budget like we do with our operating funds. And so last year, the risk management portion, because we have a significant reserve that we'll talk about in a minute, in workers' compensation would have been a larger piece of the pie, and actually health insurance would have been a little bit smaller. But that is an area, in all of our operations of significant growth. It grows faster than most of the other obligations or responsibilities that we have is in our health insurance. We do have a $2.5 million unbudgeted reserve in there. The risk management category that I talked about before, you can see workers' compensation is the largest portion of that. That does also have our property and liability insurance in there. The property and liability portion funds both the premiums for our property insurance as well as maintaining a reserve for paying our deductibles. And typically, we don't max out on our deductibles in a fiscal year. We may have several occurrences that cause us to spend some of that reserve for those deductibles. But in this past year, with the tornadoes, the floods, and the hailstorms, we've actually done that 3 times over. And so we actually had to take some funding out of our contingencies and our operating funds to help build that back up for this next fiscal year, for this current fiscal year, to be able to fund deductibles going forward. So it does have both the premiums and the deductibles, and then it also has our unemployment insurance. As I mentioned before, the unbudgeted reserve that you see here of $16 million is for our workers' compensation program. This is a reserve that's developed and recommended by our actuary that is actually a reserve for injuries that have already occurred and the projection of payments into future years for injuries that have already occurred. So we're working on building that reserve up. Right now, we're about 57% funded on that, and that's been increasing as we've been working on that through the years to get that built up. Information technology, this allows, again, as I mentioned before, for multi-year contracts in supporting our systems that we have, our business systems, as well as our telephone systems. The telephone services that are supported here are for the landline services for city phones, for cellular phones, as well as for our 911 service, and that's about $4 million. The final area that we have to look at is our total budget that we have for Advanced A&E. The Advanced A&E is a funding that's been set aside in the Municipal Facilities Authority that allows us to begin the design on projects that are funded through the General Obligation Program, bond program, and this is to be able to begin design prior to the time that we have the funds all available to complete the construction of the projects. And so once the bonds are sold and the funding is available to complete the project, those plans are then repurchased from the MFA by the bond fund. So this becomes a revolving fund that allows us to get out ahead of the projects in beginning the design. And that's all that I have on the MFA. So if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer those.
All right, any questions?
I have a question, just something I don't understand. When you had the health insurance slide up there, the last line was unbudgeted reserves. Explain that.
That's where we have.
I should know what that means. But
that's where we have fund balance from previous years where we've made contributions and we've spent less on our insurance programs and the contributions that have been made, and then we hold that in reserve, and it's there in the event, particularly because we're self-funded on our indemnity program, that if expenditures go higher than what are anticipated, we have the reserves there to help offset that. That wouldn't require us to come back to our operating funds for more.
Where would I see that in the books if I was looking at the number?
No, on the finances, it would not be on, as far as on the budget, it's not on the budget. Mm-hmm. It's actually off the budget. We do have some fund balance that we budget to provide some flexibility, like a contingency, and then we have reserves that we hold in the event that we had some catastrophic events or had significant increases beyond what we anticipated.
But it would be shown in the MFA financials.
In the financial statements, it would be shown.
Okay, as fund balance. As fund balance.
Yes.
Okay,
that's right.
Okay.
Thanks.
Pat and then Sam.
A question on the risk management rate, on the unbudgeted reserves, $16 million. And you said that was accumulated to cover deductibles?
On the risk management, it's actually accumulated to be able to cover the future obligations for injuries that have already occurred.
We had $16 million
yes.
compared to a $12.5 million budget.
Yes. And that's estimates on injuries that have already occurred, what we're going to pay out over the lifetime of those injuries, whether it's medical costs or the actual payments to the individuals.
Okay. So where would the deductible part of our catastrophic insurance policies come into play? Would that be in the risk management?
That would actually be under, actually on the property and liability, that was on the property insurance where I was talking about the deductibles. I'm sorry. So it's not on the workers' comp side, but on the property side. So when we have...
So the risk management piece is strictly workers' comp kind of?
Actually, I'm sorry. The risk management piece is workers' compensation, property and liability, and unemployment insurance.
Okay.
And so the deductible piece of that is for the property insurance.
Okay, so it would be included in the risk management number?
Yes.
And so would you use your budget or your reserves?
We actually have a budgeted
budget item
for that budgets to be able to pay for the deductible portion so that we aren't hitting all of the operations for those deductibles when we have an event that causes damage to the facility.
Approximately what's our liability if we had to pay all our deductibles in a year?
Well, on each event, we have a limit of $250,000 on each individual event. And like I said, on the tornado, we exceeded our deductible, and so we had to pay the deductible. On the flood, we had the deductible that we had to pay. And then actually on the flood, we had to pay more because a portion of the damage occurred in a floodplain. And so in that case, our deductible was $500,000. So this past year, it's been about $1 million that we've had to pay in deductibles, which is what caused us to have to go back to our operating funds and do an additional transfer from our general fund to help shore that up and to pay those deductibles. Typically, in a typical year, it's usually, I could get the history for you, but I don't think typically we have more than one event that would exceed that $250,000. And a lot of years, we don't even exceed that in one event.
But you try to budget for those?
Yes, we do. That's actually in the budget.
All right. Sam?
Just from a general point, multi-year funding, most of the city's operations were prohibited from multi-year funding. How is it that we can do this and we can't?
The trust law allows for that, and public trusts can do multi-year contracts, and it's the city funds that are limited to annual obligations. So it's within the city operations that we can do a contract that it would have to be approved each year, where the trusts give us more flexibility in the trust law that allows us to be able to do multi-year contracts.
I understand it, but how much, I guess, how much more opportunity is there to do multi-year contracting that we're not doing?
Difficult to say. You know, it's just where we have opportunities that we see that it's beneficial, then we come back with a recommendation to take that to one of the trusts.
So there aren't specific areas that we're prohibited by state statute from doing multi-year. As long as we have a trust vehicle to do it, we can do it.
We can do it, that's right.
But we do a lot of it if you look at some of the trusts. The waste management contract is done to the Environmental Assistance Trust is a $10 million a year contract. The Veolia water contract for wastewater operation services runs through the Water Utilities Trust is a $10 million a year contract and such. So we do take advantage of that where we can or where we need to.
It's just not always, from my observation, it's just not always practical to utilize it. I mean, for the most part, being on a balanced budget is the better way to do it. I mean, there's no question about it. I think there are just once in a while there are opportunities come along for long-term contracts that you get a better price by doing it. But a lot of them, it wouldn't make any difference whether you did them this way or not. It'd just be more cumbersome to do them through the trust.
And where the opportunities are there, recommendations are brought back. And we do have the MFA to be able, and the PPA as well, to be able to do that for our general city operations if the opportunity exists.
All right.
I had a question.
Yeah. Skip?
Yes, on the workers' compensation in the past years, based on this budget, do you see an increase or a decrease in the budget as it relates to workers' compensation?
It's been increasing. I think the statistics were that we had actually had a lower number of claims, but the cost per claim had been higher because a lot of that's affected by medical costs. And so with medical inflation, that affects the workers' compensation program as well. I do believe the number of claims was actually down a little bit, but I'd have to get the exact numbers on that, but we do have growth in the costs in other areas, as well sometimes with the awards that you see with the Workers' Compensation Court. And so we're just at their mercy as to what they award. But we can get some specific information if you'd like.
And as it relates to the various departments as to which has a higher percentage of workers' compensation claims over other departments?
I don't have that information here, but again, we can get that. We do prepare reports and send out information to the departments in relation to the types of injuries and the numbers of injuries. so we can get that information.
Councilman, we watch that very carefully. That's part of what risk management does. We have safety officers in a lot of the line departments. Obviously, that we're probably going to have more injuries in the water department than we are in the city clerk's office, because of the amount of risk involved there. Although Francis can be a taskmaster from time to time.
Ready to vote on the MFA?
Craig, I have one other question. You mentioned that you were attempting over time to raise the percentage of unfunded future liabilities.
Right.
What's the what you said you're at 57%?
Right. I think the actuarial recommended rate, or it's an actuarial estimate based on injuries that have occurred.
Right.
I believe it's $28 or $29 million. And so we've been working over many years to try to build that up. Really, ideally, what would happen is, as soon as an injury occurs, an estimate's prepared
You'd escrow it right
on the cost of that injury. You pay the direct immediate cost, and then you would set aside in a reserve the full amount of that injury. We're not to the point that we're doing that yet, but ideally that's how we would manage, so that we're recognizing in the current year the future obligations of that injury.
What's the practice, the standard practice, say, across the state, let's just say?
I don't really know what the standard practice is, what other entities are doing. I know with us, what we had before is we had really focused pretty much more on a pay-as-you-go basis, where we would pay for the immediate costs. And that's one thing, that there are accounting requirements in the way that we recognize in our financials that if we don't have that covered, it's an unfunded liability, similar to what we've talked about with the OPEB responsibilities. And so in recognizing that obligation, then the better practice in the future would be to set that aside, but I'm not sure what
well, did you say the target was 60%, having 60% of it?
I think our target, actually, because we've been targeting trying to increase that a little bit at a time, because obviously we just can't set aside all that money at one time. I think the target had been 55%, and I believe at the end of this year we're at about 57%. And so we're trying to set that target. We'd been at 50 previously. We had good claims that have been a little bit below what we had estimated, and so we've been able to add a little bit more into the reserves.
Is there a national accounting standard for municipalities?
The accounting standard really is that you recognize any portion that you haven't funded. So obviously, I mean, there isn't a standard what you have to do. In terms of how you fund it, you have to recognize it. So really the standard would be, if you're fully funded, would be ideal.
Right. Have any idea what it costs to be fully funded?
It'd be about another $14 or $15 million at this point.
Right. Any other comments or questions on the MFA presentation on the budget? Craig, thank you. Cast your votes. Passes unanimously. We'll adjourn OCMFA. Convene as the Oklahoma City Public Property Authority. And again, Craig has a budget presentation that has been handed to the council.
The OCPPA is similar to the MFA, where the MFA is focused more on services. The PPA is really focused more on the operations of properties that are public properties. And some of the examples would be like the fairgrounds, the golf courses, the Ford Center, the Cox Convention Center. And so we'll look at some of those in more detail, but it does allow for multi-year contracts, allows us to set aside reserves for capital projects, in this case, in most cases in the PPA, and then also allows us to be able to do financing that we can't do within our city funds when there are situations that call for that. A good example would be the revenue bonds for the fairgrounds improvements that are supported by the hotel tax. And again, we'll look at that in more detail. When you look at the revenues from the PPA, the largest portion of this is fund balance. And in the fund balance, most of that is associated with the sports facilities improvements at the Ford Center and Cox Center, as well as with the fairground improvements. The golf courses is the next largest portion, and that's all of the revenue that is received from the golf courses for the operation of the golf courses, with the greens fees and cart rentals, that type of thing. Transfers from the hotel tax are strictly associated with the fairgrounds improvements. The transfers from the general fund and various other funds are associated with a natural gas contract that we have that allows us to be able to purchase natural gas from third-party vendors, and has typically provided some savings for the city and for our public trusts. Also, the transfer from the general fund helps to support the water for the golf courses, and then the operation of the Ford Center and the Cox Convention Center. On the expenditure side, when you look at the breakout, sports facilities is about $33 million, or 42% of that budget. The fairgrounds is about just under $16 million, and it's 20% of the budget. Again, you have the golf courses. Economic development is another category that typically we had before. Our TIF fund, the tax increment finance districts, were managed through the Public Property Authority. That is being moved over into the the Economic Development Trust. And then we have the MAPS contracts, which the majority of that is for the operation of the Ford Center and the Cox Center. Looking at some of these individually, the hotel tax is 5.5%, and 3 cents of the 5.5 cents goes towards fairground improvements. So the funding, I'm sorry, looking at business improvement districts first, and I'll get back to fairgrounds. The business improvement districts, basically we have the assessments on the business improvement districts, our 4 business improvement districts, and then the special improvement district for the underground. The assessments actually pass through a city fund and then are moved into the Public Property Authority for the operation of these business improvement districts for the multi-year contracts that we have with the operations of those individual districts. That's about $1.4 million. The fairgrounds is the next area that I'd started into. That is supported by the hotel tax, the 3 cents of the 5.5 cents for the hotel tax that support the fairgrounds improvements. This does pay for the debt service on the revenue bonds, and then also has the proceeds from those revenue bonds that are going towards those capital improvements. So the hotel tax is actually received into a city fund. The portion that supports the fairgrounds is transferred into the PPA that pays for the debt service on those bonds. City golf courses, this is the 5 city golf courses. All of the revenue, this is one exception where all of the operations of the golf course, all the revenue is received here, and all the expenditures are recognized within the golf courses. The only funding that comes outside of the golf course system is the transfer from the general fund that supports the water for the golf system, and it's for all 5 courses for their operations. The sports facilities improvements, when we initiated when the sports facilities tax first was initiated and the improvements started, there were certain deadlines that had to be met. So we used the PPA as a funding mechanism to be able to complete these improvements, because we did do some short-term financing to be able to initiate those projects. Borrowed about $8.8 million. All of that was repaid within 12 months or 12 or 13 months. The total amount, I think, of the interest that was repaid on that was about $49,000. There's no debt whatsoever on that now. And so what we're doing is shifting. There are some contracts that are already obligated within the PPA. Those will continue to be funded through the PPA. The remainder of the funds, about $15 million of this budget, will be transferred back to the sports facilities tax, where the remainder of the projects will be managed. Performing arts activities, all of the revenue from our performing arts centers that the Parks Department manages for the Civic Center, the Stage Center, and Rose State Performing Arts Center, all of those revenues come through the PPA. There are some rental activities and equipment that is purchased there. Most of the operations for those are in the general fund, and so most of this budget is transferred then back to the general fund to be able to manage those operations. But most of these have multi-year contracts, and that's why we use the PPA and where we receive the revenue into the PPA. On the MAPS-related side, as I'd said before, the majority of this contract goes for the management of the Ford Center and the Cox Convention Center. We do have some revenues also that come in that support the capital maintenance, some of the capital maintenance on the original MAPS projects, and so that's also managed through here. And we also have the water taxi operations here. All of the revenues and expenses associated with the water taxi are in this category and in the PPA. So I'd be happy to answer any questions regarding the Public Property Authority budget.
All right. Questions for Craig regarding the PPA?
I have one question.
All right,
on the golf courses.
Yes, sir.
Is there a breakdown in reference to the $10.1 million for the golf courses as to each individual course?
Yes, sir. Within the budget document, I believe it's, find it here. On page 14 of the budget document that was included in the packet, it will have a breakdown by each course of how much the total amount of the budget for that individual course is.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions on the PPA?
Your Honor.
Yes, Pat?
On the PPA, item A is a project to Norwick Arena at the fairgrounds. And I know there were several projects associated with rehabilitation of the Norwick Arena. What's the status of those? Are they completed, just the final project, or do we have more work to do out there?
Dennis, can you answer that? Doesn't look like it.
No, sir, I can't, but I can certainly get you a summary of where we are on all those.
Because it's a great facility out there, and it had been allowed to, I think, deteriorate some, and I think it's important that we build it back to its former glory.
Yeah, the fact of the matter is I don't think you're ever done with an arena like that that's got that much age on it. They do some improvements, and there's going to be some continual upgrades that are going to be needed.
I think that's important because we, I think, failed to make those continual upgrades over the years. We got behind.
We'll get back to you on the status report.
All right, Meg, and then Skip.
Just a very quick question, and this is on item H, and it's the resolution continuing the greens fees at the golf courses. And there's a breakout in annual memberships versus just one-time play. And I was just curious how many people are annual members of the golf system. Does anybody
Yeah, it's very few.
know that?
Rob, can you answer that? Rob Lewis.
I don't know the exact number of that actually purchase them. There's probably maybe 300 or 400 rounds, maybe a year. But each time you purchase one, it's either 100 rounds, you buy a block of 100 rounds, or 125 rounds, and I don't know how that breaks up into people.
Until we get back with you with some follow-up information on that.
Curious.
Hi. Yes, and this may be back to Craig, but on page 14, when you look at the breakdown of the revenues, and it's Hefner, Lincoln, Trosper, Early Wine, and Stewart is an in and out as far as the breakdown. Can you tell me if it's possible at some point to have James Stewart Golf Course in the total inside of this breakdown, as opposed to, since the James E. Stewart Golf Course is not included in the bond indenture for the golf system, the total is presented excluding and including Jimmy Stewart Golf Course.
Right. And it's just, I know that the bond indenture does not, at the time of the bonds, the golf system did not include Jimmy Stewart, and so that wasn't in the bond indenture. And so what we do is show a breakout of what the budget would be without Jimmy Stewart, just to show that golf system that's consistent with what was in the bond indenture, and then we add that in to recognize that as a part of our golf system.
And it wasn't included?
I believe that's correct, that there's some bonds that are outstanding that Jimmy Stewart didn't exist at the time that the bonds were actually sold.
Right. There was some debt issued before, and so the revenue off of Jimmy Stewart wasn't a part of that.
It hadn't been constructed yet.
And so for the bonds, we show it as the revenue that revenue wasn't pledged toward those bonds.
Any other questions about the PPA or ready to vote? How about a motion?
Second.
All right, cast your votes. Passes unanimously. We'll adjourn OC PPA, convene as the Oklahoma City Environmental Assistance Trust. We have 4 items.
Move the items.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any comments or questions on the EAT?
May I just ask City Manager, on C and D, Jim, just your best shot of the debris, storm debris collection, one related to the hailstorm, the other related to the flood.
Actually, one's the tornado, I believe, and the other one's the flood, but go ahead, yes.
Okay. 150, right, 450 total. There's some FEMA reimbursement. There's waiting on some federal disaster.
Don't believe we're going to get FEMA reimbursement on these outside of the tornado portion of it that was in Cleveland County.
What's just your best shot of the $450,000 that we might get reimbursed on?
Very small portion of it, just a few thousand.
So we're out 450.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Ready to vote the EAT? All right, cast your votes. Passed unanimously. We'll adjourn the OCEAT, reconvene the council meeting with the consent docket. All right, we have a motion and a second. A lot on the consent docket today. Are there any individual comments that council would like to make?
Yeah, I have one. Excuse me. Number 6, Alpha Papa AP.1.
Okay.
If I could, Your Honor, I was going to just a couple of brief points, N and O. I'd like to briefly mention 6AH, CE, and CG.
We do have a number of trail items on the consent docket this morning, so I've asked Mr. Wisenhunt to come forth and give us a short presentation on, I think there are 3 different trail-related items.
Good morning.
BS, okay. All right. Wendell?
Good morning, Mayor and Council, Mr. City Manager. We do, as Mr. Couch mentioned, have several items that pertain to our trail system that's becoming more wonderful by the year. Today you have before you 3 items that are going to have a great effect on the trail system. One is the Tinker Draper Trail receipt of grant funds, the Earlywine receipt of grant funds, and in both cases approval of expenditure of bond funds. There's also an item on here from Public Works that puts out to bid the redesign and the construction of the Route 66 bridge that will cross Lake Overholser, which will have an effect on one of the MAPS projects. I'll just start by saying to you that in 1997, Council adopted the master plan that you see before you, and that a lot has happened since then. On this slide, you'll see on the black line the representation of the planned trails. On the green line, you'll see representation of the trails that have been completed, which are currently in excess of 60 miles throughout the community. The next slide shows the funded trails. The orange line represents trails currently under construction. The one that you see there is the North Grand Trail, and the bold blue line represents funded trails, which include the 2 I've already mentioned, the Tinker Draper Trail and the Earlywine Trail. We'll receive an additional 30 to 40 miles of trails that have been funded. The next slide includes the MAPS, upcoming MAPS program sites, and you see on this slide all the trails that are currently planned. The Tinker, including the MAPS trails, which will link the river with Lake Overholser, will encircle Lake Draper, will have a trail that will link Lake Hefner to the river, and the airport trail as well. We have about $40 million in MAPS funds to complete the MAPS projects called for in the MAPS proposal. Upon the completion of these trails, will be in excess of 130 miles of trails throughout the community that will be well linked. You can see that we will have links from many of our recreational and aquatic venues throughout the community, including the 2 that are before you today, the Tinker Draper Trail, which is about 8 miles long, and the Earlywine Trail, which is about 4.5 miles long. We hope that our intention and hope is that both of those trails will be completed next summer. The linkages continue. We are soon to have a very well-defined linkage of transportation throughout the community via our trail system. I'd like to thank Russell Klaus, Eric Winger, as well as Dennis Clowers, who are my partners in making this all happen. I wanted to be brief because I know you have a large agenda, but I will tell you that we anticipate having one of the best trail systems in the country in the next few years, and we'll all see that because it's going to happen relatively fast. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Comments or questions? Yeah. Brian?
Wendell, I hate to put you on the spot here, and I'm not arguing the benefit or the necessity of the trails, but looking at the map, And specifically in Ward 5 and in Ward 4, you have the proposed trail around the lake. You have a funded trail going in northwest direction from the lake, and it ends up at a trail that is a planned trail.
And the early warning trails.
Okay. And then along, say around I-44, you have a proposed MAPS 3 trail, as well as a funded trail around 104th Street, and a planned trail that cuts across Moore.
It stops at Moore and begins on the other side, yes, sir.
Okay, well, the whole idea of well-linked.
Pardon me, sir?
The term you used, well-linked.
Mm-hmm.
If that trail is stopping at Moore and then beginning again, to me
that's going.
Here it shows it goes all the way through Moore.
It's going to require the participation of Moore, and there's still discussions with Moore on that participation. We assume that they'll want to participate, but it will require their participation.
Okay, so like is the likelihood that they participate like better than a snowball's chance, or? That's about where I would rate it.
Well, we work with a number of communities. If you look at the map, we're going through Nichols Hills. There's got a critical link through Nichols Hills that's being worked on to make that link off of Hefner. There's a link that has to go through Del City to tie into the Tinker diagonal, and there's a link that we're looking through to go through more. We've also had some discussions with Edmond and tying into some of the trails up there. So we do work with the surrounding communities to make that happen. And I think that, I won't put a percentage on it, but I think it's a pretty good chance that something will happen.
I think City Manager and I would agree that certainly the citizens of other cities want trails, as do our citizens, so we think we'll see a positive response.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, Gary?
This last map, the one you have up now, Wendell.
Yes.
If I read this correctly, that anything that's black on that map is still...
It's a planned trail, yes, sir.
Not funded.
That's correct.
But I thought the MAPS 3 trail project was going to build all of the trails that we had in the master plan.
No, sir, not all of them. There are a number of trails. I'll pick one. You see it on the far north of this map that runs along the turnpike that is not yet funded.
And the one down in the South Canadian River is a future one for some years off. What we did with the MAPS 3 is, with the monies available, we tried to get the ones that would give us the most connectivity and looping most of the city the best we could with it.
The master plan is 220, 30?
210, I believe.
210?
Yeah, 207, sir.
And this connectivity gets us how many total?
About 140.
140,
and,
okay.
You know,
so
not
those
all
are the two numbers, 210 master, and we're short that.
Not all the routing's been done for all these trails, so the exact number isn't known, but in the neighborhood of 140.
Okay.
It's a wonderful plan. We look forward to being completed.
So
Thank you.
Is it my understanding then that from the MAPS 3 that there will not be funding to complete the trails as you have mapped out here?
No, sir, there's not enough funding to complete all of the trails. Now, the MAPS committee is still discussing the trails and the routing and which trails to do, but no, sir, there's not enough money in the MAPS program to do all the trails in the Trails Master Plan, no, sir.
But we hit the ones we believe that would be the most heavily utilized and the ones that would link together almost all the parts, the majority of the parts of the city.
When's the last time the trail system plan was updated?
I was just about to say, sir, that it's been quite a number of years, and it probably does need to be updated, and part of that updating should be to ask ourselves, do all the trails, or should all the trails that are currently in the plan be implemented? Things change, and development in areas changes, and it should be considered.
Any other comments or questions on the trail system? All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Pat, you wanted to speak about AP.
Thank you, Your Honor. This is a mutual cooperation agreement with the County Commissioners of Oklahoma County and Oklahoma City to work on joint projects. And I had a question. Will individual projects then be required to have a separate contract or an agreement? For instance, we've had several joint projects with the county to do roads in Ward 8. They've been very successful, very well done. But they had separate contracts that had to be approved by both the county commissioners and the council.
Yes.
I wondered if this would take the place of that separate approval.
No, if there's a specific, this just allows the city and the county to work together on things that may come up where there might be an emergency that has to be addressed. Yeah, if there's a specific project, like to resurface a mile of roadway, we'll have a separate agreement for that.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask the question then? How involved has it been in the past as it relates to contracts with the county and the city on just like street surfacing, on some of the outlined areas where I get a lot of calls from people saying, well, you know, we would think that the county would be out here addressing this issue, and then bring it to the city, or they refer it to the county, and the county refers it back to the city, saying that it's a city project. And in some times, it just seems like it would be, you know, prudent that both agencies could look at the project and say, you know, we could do this together. But I see so much of projects that's just laying, you know, unattended. One is maybe the city, or it's just right on the border between the city and the county. So in looking at this, I would just like to know, historically, do we have a good relationship in reference to managing and completing projects other than waiting until there is a disaster?
The answer to your question is yes. We've over the years worked very well with Oklahoma County, with Cleveland County, and with Canadian County on several projects, not only those where we're just sharing a common border, but you know, if the street or the roadway lies totally in Oklahoma City, the county really looks to the city to take care of that project. However, there have been certain instances where the county's been interested in participating, and we've reached agreements with them. Up until about 2 or 3 years ago, at that time, we had several projects on board with Oklahoma County specifically, and our funding just wasn't there, and we had to put all of those projects on hold. Several of those Councilman Ryan's familiar with out in far northwestern Oklahoma City. But yeah, we've had in my opinion, we've had a good relationship with all 3 counties.
Pat? I mean, Pete?
In the last session of the legislature, really mainly due to the efforts of Commissioner Mon, there was an amendment to the law regarding counties' ability to participate with cities. I would like to see us relook at because you know, there's always been this question about whether or not counties could work on city property. Certain questions have arisen. Well, that's been kind of pretty well cleared up, I think, in this last session of the legislature. It's always appeared to me to be about as good a bargain as we can hope for, especially in the rural areas, to supply materials and let the counties do the labor, because they have labor and equipment. And it seems to me a really bargain on our part to supply materials to them. I think it wouldn't hurt to take a new look at that in light of this recent law change. I know in my area, in the Oklahoma County area of Ward 4, Commissioner Mon is eager to participate more if we can get the funding. Obviously, the funding is a problem, but we need to be able to fund the materials. But I think that's a positive step forward. Obviously, not as positive as having the money would be. But.
Okay. Either comments or questions? Meg, you wanted to talk about N and O?
I did. I just had a couple of comments. The city was successful in receiving $900,000 recently in additional brownfields funds, and there are 2 significant projects on this agenda today, one with OCCC, Oklahoma City Community College, in Capitol Hill to do the abatement of the old Christmas Connection building, and we're really excited to have the college moving into Capitol Hill. And the second one is asbestos removal also for a portion of the Dow Center right downtown. And this, I think, will be a really significant step in redeveloping that project. So I was very pleased to see that. I wanted to mention 6AH, and that's just final acceptance of our Fire Station 8 also on Exchange Avenue near the Stockyards. I went by to see it yesterday, and it's wonderful. HSE Architects did a fabulous job on the project. I was happy to see it. And then a couple of just wonderful civic partners. I see Chuck Wiggin and Jim Brown here in the audience. I wanted to mention the donation from the Civic Center Foundation to the city of the capital improvements. Really appreciate that. And also the Myriad Gardens Foundation has completed a lot of work on the water stage, and that's resulted in over $1 million donation back to the city for their improvements. So I think it's just so representative of the partnerships that our arts organizations have with the city, and thank you very much for what you've done.
All right. Sam, you want to talk about BS?
Thank you, Mayor. This, regarding the ambulance service paid through our Total Care membership, just update on our first full year. Our opt-out,
It was less than we'd anticipated. I'd ask Laura Johnson, or Doug's here. Can you give us some answers, or Laura can come back, one of the two of you?
less than anticipated.
I'm Doug Dowd. I'm the Deputy Budget Director. I work with EMSTA on this program, and our participation was just slightly lower for single-family residents than we expected, but higher than we expected for apartments. So overall, our participation rate is better than expected, and we're getting in a little bit more revenue than we expected. And what we're using that for is our reserve fund to revenue stabilization, so we don't have to raise the rate for the next several years.
So we're set for 2-3 years.
That's correct, sir.
What was the percentage? Do you recall on
It's
opt-out?
about 89%
89?
in the program.
Okay, thanks very much.
Any other comments or questions on the consent docket? We have a motion and a second. Let's vote. Passes unanimously. Moves us on to page 28 in the council agenda and the concurrence docket.
Move the concurrence docket.
All right. Is there any individual considerations about the concurrence docket? We're ready to vote. All right. Cast your votes. Passed unanimously. We're on to item 8. These are items that require a separate vote. Start with a series of zoning cases, the first of which is in Ward 7. The address is 13008 Broadway Extension. It's currently a simplified plan unit development, and it would become a new SPUD. Skip?
I haven't received any calls in reference to this. And is the applicant here? Ms. Steiner, have you have any information on this?
There's really not any protest on this. Basically, it's a new dealership, and they're wanting to do another sign for this auto sales. So Planning Commission approved it based on an administrative amendment we did to another PUD that limits the number of signs. Planning Commission staff didn't have any problem with this approval.
Move it.
Second. All right. Cast your votes on item 8A1. Passed unanimously. Item 8A2 is a zoning case in Ward 2. The address is 319 Northwest 23rd Street. It's currently R4 General Residential Historic Landmark Urban Conservation. Several other things, too. And it's going to become a simplified plan unit development. Sam?
Thank you, Mayor. It's located on 23rd Street at Hudson, just east across the street from the Cheevers. It's new building, retail, and accessory parking to the rear. It's passed through Urban Design Commission, Historic Preservation Commission, Planning Commission unanimously. I'd ask if there's any objection here this morning. Not seeing it, would move for approval.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second on item 8A2. Cast your votes. Passes unanimously. Item 8A3 is a zoning case in Ward 6. The address is several addresses on Northwest 18th Street. It's currently R3 Medium Density Residential in the Gatewood Urban Conservation District, and it would become a new simplified plan unit development. Meg?
Thank you, Your Honor. This is a really important project, and I believe Brian Fitzsimmons is here as the owner's representative. Brian, would you like to come tell us just a little bit about this project? And as you come forward, for those that aren't familiar with the area in Gatewood, this is 18th Street is the direct entrance as you head into class in School of Advanced Studies.
Yes,
so it's an incredibly important street.
Brian Fitzsimmons, 18th Street as you come into Classen, as Meg mentioned. And unfortunately, the 2 previous buildings that were there were damaged by fire significantly, and actually demolition on those is beginning today. It might be halfway down as we speak. But the intent of the simplified plan is to allow a higher density than, or actually almost equivalent density to what is there, but slightly higher. The emphasis for the simplified planning is that the Gatewood codes did not allow to build back what was already there just because of the fire issue, and there was just a clause in the zoning. So that started the process. We have also are happy to report that we're including some green elements that are not currently supported by Oklahoma Ziting, such as porous paving, allowing green roof structures and all that, and we're intending to explore and incorporate all those as best we can, budget allowed.
Well, Brian, I really appreciate the effort that you spent in meeting with the city and meeting with the staff to make this work for the neighborhood. I know Gatewood is thrilled to have this project coming forward, and there were no protests at any of the meetings, and the city staff recommends this, so I would move approval.
Great. We have a motion and a second on item 8A3. Cast your votes. Passes unanimously. Item 8B is a special permit request. This is a final hearing. Address in Ward 3 is 6224 Southwest 8th Street. Larry?
Thank you, Your Honor. Is the applicant present? Bob Tiner? I had a couple of questions, and I don't know whether you can address them or whether we need to defer this for the applicant. On the first page, on number 1, all trucks leaving the site should be covered. Is there a difference in your mind between the words should and must?
No, we'll clarify that. They will be covered. And that would be a zoning violation if they left the site and they weren't covered.
So we can assume that it must be covered?
Yes.
And then was there any discussion at the Planning Commission, the access to this particular property is going to be on Southwest 8th Street on page 14, or page 5, excuse me. And the comments about Southwest 8th Street is it's a substandard one-lane road. Are we going to...
This is a situation where there's a PUD that was developed to the north that was rezoned recently. At some point, 8th Street will be improved to cover that commercial traffic. And this is probably a temporary use. I mean, it's a longer term, but at some point this will all be redeveloped commercially, and that 8th Street would be improved. So, I mean, that was a concern because it is a one-lane asphalt street.
And then the third question I had was, it appears from this is going to be a temporary use. This is predicated just for the ground that we're going to be taking out of here is going to be used for the outlet mall. So that this is going to have a length of life to it, because obviously when the construction on the mall is done, we wouldn't need that. But there's nothing in here about any length of time of how long this SPUD will be, or special permit will be granted.
There wasn't, typically on special permits, we have put time limits on them in the past. This one, that wasn't discussed. The council could do that now, or we can defer this for 2 weeks and we can talk to the applicant about a time limit, whichever you're comfortable with.
Well, I hate to hold this up, but I would like a time limit, like 2 years or something like that put on this. We just can I make that recommendation from?
Yeah, you could make an amendment today, right?
Yes, you could do that.
Okay. Unless there's any questions from the council, I'd like to move for approval, but I'd like to put an amendment in here that has a two-year time limit, say on this particular special permit, which should give them plenty of time to do the construction, I would think.
Bobby, have you any reason to think that's a good or a bad idea?
I would probably recommend maybe a 5-year, just to give them more time.
I'll go with 5.
But,
okay. All right.
I'd second it, but I have some other questions about it also.
Okay. We have a second. Go ahead.
Larry pointed out that in paragraph 1, the word should is used, but that word should is throughout this thing. In 6, it says should be graded. 7, it said should be no access. 8 says should be limited. Why don't we just change all those to must?
That's how we're going to enforce it. So
I just amend all the words in 1, 5, 6, and 8, where the word should appears, to either change it to shall or must, whichever is the best lawyer word.
probably shall.
Shall?
That's what we'll use.
Okay. Okay, I'd so move.
Okay. Okay, we have a motion and a second. Need to vote on these individually? Yes. Okay, what about Larry's amendment? Does that need to be voted on individually? Yes. Okay. Okay, well, first vote on Larry's amendment. This is to put the 5-year stipulation on it. Cast your votes. Passed unanimously. Now we'll vote on Pete's changing the shoulds to shalls. We have a second on that?
Second.
All right, cast your vote. And those are changed. And now, Larry, you want to vote on the rest of it?
Yeah, I moved it.
Okay, cast your votes. It passes unanimously. We get it all?
We did.
All right, thanks. We're on to item 8C. This has been withdrawn. So we move on to item 8D, and this clarifies some language about traveling in construction zones. And this is a final hearing. Anybody have any comments or questions on this item? All right, we have a motion and a second. We're voting on item 8D. Cast your votes. Passes unanimously. Item 8E deals with external displays of tires. Any comments or questions on this item? Looks like we first need to vote on the amendments. All right, how about a motion on item 8E1?
Move it.
Second.
All right, cast your votes. Passes unanimously. And then how about a motion on item 8E2?
Move it.
All right, cast your votes. And it passes unanimously. Item 8F deals with the ONG franchise agreement.
Move the item.
This election takes place 1 week from today. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Any comments or questions here?
I'm sorry, August 24th. It's the runoff date.
It's the runoff. Okay,
Yeah,
so it's not the primary. Yeah. All right, thank you for that correction. August 24th is our ONG franchise agreement election. And we have a motion and a second, so cast your votes on item 8F. And it passes unanimously. Item 8G is a designation of some handicap parking spots on Northwest 23rd Street. It's in Ward 2. Sam, you okay with this?
Yes, it's one in front of each of two buildings, 411 and 415, Northwest 23rd. Is there any protest here this morning?
All right, we're voting on item 8G. Cast your votes. Passes unanimously. Item 8H addresses a loophole in our lake policies.
It has to do with water skiing at the lakes. Wendell's here to give us a brief overview of the ordinance.
Mr. Chairman, recently the police department began to see other towing behind boats in addition to skiing, and we didn't have a current clear definition of what skiing was, so they called the municipal counselor's office, and we've been working with the municipal counselor's office to come up with a proper definition of skiing, and that definition that is going to be used is that water skiing means the act of planing over the water while being towed by a watercraft. It's couched in those terms because we think, with the help of municipal counselor's office, that language will cover anything that is towed behind a boat in the act of skiing or planing behind a boat.
Okay.
That's the only change.
Any comments or questions about this? All right, we're ready to vote then on item 8H. Cast your votes. Passes unanimously. Item 8I is dilapidated structures. Is there anyone here wishing to speak at this public hearing regarding dilapidated structures? Any item listed under 8I? All right, how about a motion then? And a second? Cast your votes on item 8I. Passes unanimously. Item 8J is a public hearing regarding unsecured structures. Is there anyone here wishing to speak under any item listed under 8J? All right, how about a motion then? Cast your votes on 8J. It passes unanimously. Item 8K is an appeal by Yellow Cab Company of the Traffic and Transportation Commission's approval of of a new taxi license. We have two people that have signed up to speak.
Honorable Mayor and Council, my name is Roger Andrews. I'm General Manager of Yellow Cab Company. Our address is 107 Northwest 14th in Oklahoma City.
Okay.
I've been in the taxi cab business for 29 years, and first of all, I'd like to thank Councilwoman Salyer for her time and assistance in some taxi cab matters recently. I'd also like to thank Councilman Bowman for his time and efforts as some taxi cab ordinances were reviewed in the past year. What I would like to discuss this morning is the ordinance pertaining to color schemes. It's ordinance 56-46, and it says, all vehicles for hire regulated by this article shall be of a color scheme and bear the licensee's trade name, monogram, or insignia, which are distinguishable from the color scheme, licensee's trademark, monogram, or insignia used on the vehicles of any other license already operating pursuant to this article. Now, in all my years in the cab business, we've had very distinctive separation of the colors. As Yellow Cab, our primary color is yellow. Our secondary color is black, the bumpers, the lettering, the numerals on it. It's very distinguishable. Today's applicant is going to try to copy those colors for whatever reason. And our customers need to be clear when they call Yellow Cab that they're getting a Yellow Cab. When we get calls from people, only about 20% of the time, if they're lodging a complaint, do they get the cab number. So I would just like to say that I feel like when we file our application each year and pay our fees, we indicate yellow and black as our colors. And I think there are plenty of other colors out there that this applicant could be using.
All right. How do you know what their colors are?
That's what they've applied for. The Traffic Commission approved their color scheme of yellow and black.
Okay. Brian?
The yellow that the cabs are painted, is that a custom color that you guys actually have mixed or ordered?
Yes.
That's a custom color?
Yes.
Are they wanting to use the exact same yellow color or just a variant of it? Or?
It's yellow. I mean, I don't think the public is going to differentiate a shade or two. Okay. And also their fares are going to be higher. Their meter's going to be higher than ours. So, you know, if a customer sees one of their vehicles pulls up, you know, a taxi cab's a taxi cab to most people, and they get in when, in fact, they were hoping to get a yellow cab.
Well, looking at this, I could probably argue it both ways, but I have to tend to believe that what you have is proprietary, and that would be an infringement. And so, just from a personal standpoint, I don't see how they're going to benefit from having a yellow cab unless it is riding on the back of what you've already established. And so, from that standpoint, I think that it is proprietary, and I think that's a problem.
Thank you.
Why don't we bring up the next person who's asked to speak, Tanya Valencia. We will need your name and address for the record, please, Tanya.
Tawana Valencia, co-owner A1 Taxi, 3511 Charleston Road, Norman, Oklahoma. I spoke up at the Traffic Commission against the name. They wanted to come up under A Taxi and have yellow and black taxis. I stand the same thing Roger does here. There's plenty of colors out there. They don't need to combine our colors. You know, be original. Pick a color for you. It says a color scheme, differential. That is not in those terms. They need to pick a color that differs them from everybody else. And in fact, the police stood up, Sergeant McCaleb and Sergeant Ricketts was against it also, and said it would cause too much confusion when people were calling in, like say for a complaint. They see one color, yellow, they see black. I mean, people just tend to see things very straightforward, you know. They don't look at numbers like he said. And I just believe that this is going to cause a lot of confusion. And there's already confusion out there with the limos coming up under taxi names and stuff like this. I just believe that we can do better than that to differentiate for our customers.
Okay, Tanya, thanks.
Thank you.
I guess one of my concerns is that, I mean, if you go to an extremely large city, New York, for instance, every cab looks the same. And they're obviously owned by a large number of different companies. And so, perhaps one of the differences that I heard in that first comment was that the prices in a New York City cab, for instance, are all the same. I mean, it is standardized. You're paying the same thing no matter which company you're using. And if they are using a different price structure, then perhaps that is a reason that they should differentiate their color also. It also seems that, who are we trying to protect here? Are we trying to protect the existing cab companies, or are we trying to benefit the consumer, who might not try to figure out how many different colors there are in a city for a cab? I mean, if you see that yellow and black, it's going to allow you to distinguish that that's a cab, and you may or may not care which company it is. But it will benefit the consumer if the cabs all have the same color scheme. And that's not a comment necessarily pro or for this. I think it's just a comment on whom do we represent and to what extent do we weigh the parameters of this issue. I'd love some comments.
Is the applicant here?
I'd just like to say one other thing.
Let's hear from the applicant.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and before he does, I think both Yellow and A1 make a very logical argument. I'm just going to give this gentleman, I haven't talked with him, the benefit of the doubt, in that he came to the Traffic Commission with a name that I understand the reason for the Traffic Commission not going along with it. But at that Traffic Commission meeting was asked then to take another name. And that's where, I understand, Thunder came up. So had you had some thought prior to the Traffic Commission meeting, I think it'd be just as logical to come in with the name Thunder and the Thunder blue color. But that was done, that change was done at the Traffic Commission. And I'd like to see, Mayor, in light of what we tried to do with this ordinance, primarily it was to address denial of service. And I think we've really had some good success with respect to that since the ordinance was drafted. And the other real issue with respect to redoing the taxi ordinance was to encourage, like this gentleman, new startup businesses, small startup businesses. Unless you've got a bunch of money into the paint, I think we're spending a lot of time on something so that we can take care of very easily with a change in color. So I'd like to hear your
What is your name and address for the record?
My name is Jafar Najum, 11617 Roxborough Avenue, Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. I'm the CEO of J&K Enterprises, DBA Thundercab. It's not about the color. 30 years, I think we all know, predominantly there's been one cab company in Oklahoma City. Something to think about it. This appeal, Traffic Commission 21st June, the same point was raised, color scheming. Now, the question is, the same point was pondered upon, it was deferred, nullified, it didn't hold any water. It was unanimously voted, the company is a go. After that, the company has still been sitting for 30 days. It's cost the company a tremendous amount of money, revenue, labor, every facet of business operation. And we're here discussing the same thing. Being confused is one thing. Throwing confusion is another. So if you could kindly just for 3 to 5 minutes pay attention to that presentation. On the left side is John Gotti, the last Don. On the right side, if you pay attention, that's John Gotti when he was young. Are we confused? Keep looking for 5 minutes. I bet some of you would think, yeah, that is true. That's not true. On the right side is me. Because if that was true, I'll walk out, I'll be arrested. Let's see what Yellow Cab is. That's yellow. That's yellow. It's an icon. It's a benchmark within our nation all around the world. That's yellow. That's yellow. That is yellow. That is yellow. That is Yellow Cab. That is Yellow Cab. That is yellow cab. That is yellow cab. That is. Let's see the world standard of a taxi throughout the world, throughout the globe. This is the taxi. Are we confused? This is a taxi in China, in France. This is Michigan, United States of America. A taxi. Are we confused? This is India. This is South Africa, Johannesburg, Cape Town. Now let's see yellow cab, Oklahoma City. This is yellow cab. This is also yellow cab, Oklahoma City. That was black. This is gray. Now we bootleg. This is also Oklahoma City yellow cab. This is also a yellow cab, Oklahoma City. This is also yellow cab, Oklahoma City. Now, because predominantly this is the only cab company, we're going willy-nilly. Hey, we'll just do what we like. This is Thunder Cab, ladies and gentlemen. Are we confused? In primary colors? I've got a 9-year-old daughter. She knows her primary colors. Are we confused? This is Thunder Cab. Is anyone getting confused between yellow cab and Thunder Cab? Please let me know if someone gets confused between a yellow cab and a Thunder Cab. Are we still getting confused? Are we? Let's see if we're still getting confused. Yellow cab and Thunder Cab. Are we? Is anyone in Oklahoma City, the world has established that they're not confused. Well, we're trying to be told that only Oklahoma City citizens and the city council will get confused between a yellow and black and yellow, which the globe, the entire world has established, we're not confused. The driver's going to come up from yellow and say, oops, sorry, I thought this was my yellow cab. Are we to believe that? Are we? Are we? Are we? I cannot make copies, ladies and gentlemen. The top page is the application of 420 West Main that Thunder Cab put in. It shows clearly what our color scheme is, because we can get the license. We have to file this application. Second page is what Yellow Cab filed it. These are official documents. It clearly states their color scheme is yellow with black lettering. Doesn't say anything with black bumper or nothing. It's Yellow Cab with black lettering. It is filed at 420 West Main. You can call Valerie right now. She can fax it over here. That is their color scheme. As of right now, Yellow Cab is out of compliance with black bumpers, black sidings, some gray, some not gray.
We appreciate you coming down. Thanks. Well, at issue here is an appeal, and Mr. City Manager, as I understand it, the Traffic Commission has approved the color scheme for the new cab license application.
That's correct.
Okay, and so this is an appeal of that decision by the competing cab companies. So that's the issue for the City Council today. Any comments or questions?
As we have members of staff here,
that's why I asked.
If the staff want to make a comment, I think we ought to give them an opportunity.
Sure. Whom would you like to hear from, Pat? Jim, who should appropriately come up?
Dennis or Amy?
Look, I'm it. Do you have a question, Councilman? I don't know
just
that I have
wondered
any
if the
more to
staff
offer.
had any comments that might help us make our decision. You all had a detailed review of this. It's my understanding that the color scheme as proposed was approved by your staff? And did the staff
yes,
consider
that's correct.
the possibility of confusion when they made that decision?
The application that was made, as has been presented, was for a taxi, and the Traffic Commission felt that that was confusing between a taxi and A1 taxi, so they asked the applicant to change the name, which they did. I don't know, Stuart can confirm this, I don't know that there was any discussion about the difference in the color scheme.
Well, there was some discussion on the color scheme. Yellow Cab and A1 Taxi both brought that to their attention, but there was not enough evidence presented for the Traffic Commission to consider requiring or requesting the applicant to make a change in their color scheme. The one difference between today's presentation and the one that went to Traffic Commission is there were no like color depictions of how the vehicles were to be painted. There's just a written description as to how Thundercab was proposing to paint their cabs.
Mm-hmm. Okay. But the Traffic Commission they were pleased with just a verbal description of how the vehicle was going to look as far as the paint. Is that right?
That's correct. As a matter of fact, that's the only information that's required on any vehicle for hire application. It's just a written description on the appearance of the vehicle.
In the pictures that we saw this morning of the Thunder cabs, the black and yellow scheme that they proposed, are those actual Thunder cabs that are in existence today that have been painted black and yellow?
You would have to ask that of the applicant.
Let me make a point clear. At the Traffic Commission meeting, Yellow Cab did not even feel necessary to attend the meeting. Secondly, that's just a prototype that we made the visuals for this council meeting just to make the point clear that there can't be any confusion unless someone is totally colorblind. So we are not rolling. We could not. We were supposed to be on the 6th docket. At the last minute, after I received that we were on the docket, we were pulled out for 30 days to sit at home. So this is just we're not rolling. We can't do anything. The offices
So
are...
you haven't painted the 5 vehicles that you list here have not been painted yet?
Mr. Ryan, I'm not going to paint 5 vehicles and incur in the cost. Just one is painted ready.
My question was, they have not been painted yet?
No.
Thank you.
Brian? Amy, you might be able to answer this question. As this process is going through, how much weight, or is there any weight given at all, to proprietary items in a business such as this? For instance, if somebody had Boomer Cab Company and all their cabs were crimson, and somebody came along and said, we're going to do Sooner Cab Company, and all their colors are crimson also, maybe just a little different mix. I mean, where do we draw the line? I mean, we've decided we're going to regulate this. Where do we draw the line on proprietary and not proprietary?
Well, we're really just looking to make sure that they look distinct so that customers can tell the difference. When we receive complaints about the cars, we know which company is being complained about, whether it's Yellow Cab, A1, Thunder Cab. I think the Traffic Commission felt like with the mixed color scheme, it was different enough. Also added to that was the consideration that they were willing to change the name of it because that did seem a little too confusing, A taxi versus A1 taxi. So they made some concession on their application, and I think the Traffic Commission did not want to push them any further on that.
So there was no weight given to the proprietary element of color?
Not really, no. There was discussion from the police department that was mentioned that they thought it could be confusing to the public, but we did not have any pictures to look at to show what the actual vehicles would look like.
And I think, as Mr. Andrews pointed out, as he cited from the regulations, he didn't use the word proprietary. He used the word distinguishable. I, like Brian, coming in this morning, could have gone either way. Having not talked to the gentleman, simply seeing his presentation, to me, it's a very distinguishable color scheme, as long as he keeps to that color scheme and doesn't change it, doesn't have the opportunity or the flexibility to change that yellow and black around any way he wants to. If that scheme stays in that same configuration on every cab, after seeing the presentation today, to me, it's most distinguishable.
All right, thanks. Skip?
I would just like for legal to provide a memo to me and any other member of the council on this whole issue of the city protecting a proprietary interest of any business. Because I just don't see how, if every cab company in Oklahoma City was yellow, I really don't understand how we as the council or the city could intrude on the fact that they're just not distinguishable.
Well, I don't think we are, Skip.
Well, I mean, that's what the whole issue started out here this morning was, the fact that you know, you have a cab company that says that they're yellow, and they're objecting to another cab company because they're saying that their color scheme is
Right, but I think it's been approved to be yellow. And it's been appealed by a competing company. So, I mean, we're not restricting it. At least we haven't yet. That's before us right now.
That's what I'm saying.
Okay, it hasn't been restricted to this point. And here's a couple of other elements. First of all, people in Oklahoma City don't hail a cab very often. You're either at a hotel where they're lined up, or you've ordered one and one comes. So it's not like you're trying to distinguish and you'd be hailing down a cab based on the color. But secondly, I think it still bothers me, if we're trying to commoditize the cab business here, that they're charging different prices.
Absolutely.
And if they're charging different prices, I think from that standpoint, then there is a responsibility to differentiate. Because I can see some serious issues being created there. Brian, why don't you go ahead and
One last thing. I think the way that the question is asked, and maybe an attorney can correct me, but it's, are they similar or deceptively similar? Isn't that the distinguishing fact between two businesses? I mean, if you have a name, if it's, you know, if I have a business that's Brian's whatever, and somebody comes in and spells Brian's differently in that same business, that's deceptively similar.
My opinion is on this, and it's speaking for them as an opinion, I think they're trying to look like a cab. I don't think they're trying to look like Yellow Cab. I think if Yellow Cab were blue, I think they'd still be in here trying to be yellow, because they want to look like a universal color of a cab. That's my thought process.
Mayor, I think going back to your original argument, I think it makes sense for them to look like a cab if all cab companies charge the same fee. Then it wouldn't matter to the consuming public.
Right.
But when they don't charge the same fee, then for them to look like a cab that charges less, I think because I'm going to vote to deny the appeal. But I am struck by how in the world the Traffic Commission could ever approve it in the first place. I mean, they have a police officer saying it's going to be deceptively similar. They have somebody that came in with a name that was virtually identical to somebody else's, and now we're going to say they want to paint them yellow and they want to name themselves after an existing cab company, and we're going to give them the benefit of the doubt on whether this was a deceptive act or not? I don't think so.
It didn't seem deceptive to me to look like a cab.
When you start out by naming yourself the same as somebody else, and then you paint yourself the name of somebody else.
Trying to be first in the yellow pages.
I understand, but I have a hard time being that generous to them if that's...
They weren't first to market.
Excuse me, Mr. White. The police officer was confused that if the...
Well, it didn't sound confused. Excuse me. It didn't sound confused here. He said, it says in this that he expressed concern over the similarity of the color scheme. Noted the similarity could result in confusion. Doesn't sound like to me he was confused.
If you would let me complete, he was confused that the vehicle will change the lane.
I don't want to talk to you. Listen, I don't want to talk to you. I'm talking.
Well, it is my time.
You need to understand how this process works.
You need to sit down.
You need to understand how this works. I'm not here to argue with you. I'm going to vote your way, but I don't understand how the Traffic Commission could have ever voted the way they did. Given the circumstances, I don't see how they could have done that. Well, they had the colors. And once you charge a different price, then it does make a difference if you're the same color as somebody else. Then you have piggybacked on somebody else's lower price. You tried to piggyback on somebody else's name, and now we're going to give you the benefit of the doubt and say, oh, it's just a coincidence because all the cabs are black and yellow. Well, I don't know whether that's right or not. But I have a lot of respect for my traffic commissioner, and if he voted, it says the vote was unanimous, and I'm going to vote with it. But I do it with holding my nose, I can tell you.
All right, any other comments before I entertain a motion?
I'd just like to add that I think this brings to a bigger question, and that is why the city don't do something about this price controlling as it relates to taxi cabs. As many other cities have done the same thing, we need to have some uniformity in reference to boundaries, in reference to prices, and that way we wouldn't have this major issue, because I'm pretty sure, as Pete stated, much of this is driven by somebody thinking that they're going to be undercharged or underbid in reference to services rendered in the city of Oklahoma City.
All right, Gary?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I got to weigh in with my questions, because the pricing is, I think, with what Councilman Kelly just said. If we don't regulate the prices, I don't know that it's a concern of ours whether the prices are more or less with whoever cab company are there. Is there a requirement, Stuart, you may be able to answer this, is there a requirement in our ordinances for approval of these licenses that requires a color or requires approval of the color?
Well, the only thing that they've got is in the application for a vehicle for hire, is they post a color scheme, and the applicant just gets to basically describe it to the best of their ability. And also when it comes to aspects of pricing, how they operate their business, all they have to do is indicate on the application the rates that they're going to be charging for their fares.
But there's nothing in there that says it can't be a color that's already on a license.
That's correct.
So even if they had approved A as the name, and if they had approved, which they did, this color scheme, then the issue becomes a civil issue between the two companies?
If I can interrupt, there is a provision in the operating requirements that says that the cab company shall have distinctive colors and distinctive names that are distinguishable between one another. That is an operating requirement. Part of the application process to approve the certificate of need and necessity is to look at whether the applicant, they have some assurance that the applicant can meet those future operating requirements. So what the Traffic Commission did look at whether, looking at the color scheme, whether they could meet those operating requirements of having a distinguishable color scheme and name.
So when they used that part of the requirements, they decided that A was too close to A1, but they decided that the color scheme that the gentleman had proposed was not too close to yellow to fall under it was good enough to be easily distinguishable between the two.
Yes.
All right. How about a motion?
Move to deny the appeal. Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second to deny the appeal. So this would allow the company to have yellow and black as its colors, if it passes. Anybody else want to comment before we vote? All right, cast your votes. The appeal passes by a count of 7-1, 8-1. Do we need to vote on item?
Yes, now we need to approve that.
Okay. Now we're on to item 8K2, and this is to approve the certificate of public convenience for the cab company doing business. Cast your votes on item 8K2. Passed unanimously. Item 8L deals with police policy.
This is a slight change in the outside employment of police officers.
All right.
Police policies.
Comments or questions? All right. Cast your votes on item 8L. And it passed unanimously. Item 8M is a salary continuation for Sergeant. Okay. No reason to go into executive session on this?
No, sir.
All right. Cast your votes. Passed unanimously. Item 8N, I understand we do not need executive session.
Do not.
All right. Cast your votes on 8N. Passed unanimously. Item 8O, I understand we do not need executive session.
Do not.
All right. Cast your votes. Passed unanimously. Item 8P, I understand we do not need executive session.
Do not.
All right. Cast your votes on 8P. Passed unanimously. Item 8Q, I understand we do not need executive session.
Do not.
Okay. Cast your votes on 8Q. Passed unanimously. Item 8R, I understand we do need executive session.
Yes.
All right. Cast your votes on 8R. Passed unanimously. Item 8S, I understand we do need executive session.
Yes.
All right. Cast your votes. Passed unanimously. Item 8T, I understand we do need executive session. All right. Cast your votes on 8T, and it's moved to executive session. Item 8U, I understand we do need executive session.
Yes.
All right. Cast your votes. Passed unanimously. That puts us to item 8V, which is claims recommended for denial. Is there anyone here wishing to speak under any item listed under 8V? All right. How about a motion? Cast your votes on 8V. It passes unanimously. We're on to item 9A. These are claims recommended for approval. Is there anyone here wishing to speak on any item listed under item 9? All right, cast your votes. Passed unanimously. Item 10 is items from council. We'll start with an item that deals with outdoor cellar permits. Councilman White's been involved in this, and Pete, we have 2 people that have signed up to speak. Do you want to hear from them first? All right, Jerry Stewart. Jerry, we will need your name and address for the record.
Your Honor, my name is Jerry Stewart. I'm the Executive Vice President at Oklahoma City Community College. My address is 8404 Northwest 65th Place in Oklahoma City. The Arts Festival Oklahoma is an arts festival that is held during the Labor Day weekend and has been for the past 32 years. It is a nonprofit festival hosted by Oklahoma City Community College with our partners Women of the South, the Central Art Association, and the South Oklahoma City Chamber of Commerce. As I mentioned, it is a nonprofit operation. In fact, it is a money-losing operation for Oklahoma City Community College, and we continue to host the festival because we believe it performs a very valuable community service for the citizens of Oklahoma City, particularly those in South Oklahoma City. The college grounds, the festival is held on the grounds of Oklahoma City Community College. No public streets are closed or affected in any significant way. The college provides all infrastructure, all safety and security at its own expense. The festival has approximately 150 artist vendors, another 14 food vendors, and because we already comply with all city fire codes and that sort of thing, just this year the fees, the permits for those vendors will increase $30 due to the city fire marshal inspection. We have spent thousands of dollars just this past year due to recommendations made by the city fire marshal, and we do comply with all those regulations. We're concerned about the increase in the fee, being subject to this increase in this fee to $50. Our vendors are all small business people. The total amount of the increase would be about $8,500 for those vendors for each festival. We've already had some vendors who have indicated they won't come to the festival because of the increases in the fees, and we're concerned about others. So we have been, as you all know, supportive of Councilman White's proposal to amend the current ordinance to exempt the vendors at this festival from the fee. I do want to say to all council members, as I have said to some, that we are completely willing to comply with any police, fire, public safety regulations that the city may have.
Okay.
Jerry, let me ask you a question about what we talked before the meeting about the impact of that this is having, and there's going to be discussion today about a continuance on this thing to put this off, a decision on this off another 2 weeks. Give me an idea what that a delay would cause you.
We have already delayed the deadline for the applications 1 week pending the outcome of this council meeting. Another 2-week deadline. Of course, if that's the decision of the council, we will work with it the best we can. However, we have already the director of cultural programs, Lemuel Bartiguez, is here today with me and has reported that some vendors have indicated that they are if we don't get a resolution today, that they are going to be looking at other festivals over the Labor Day weekend. So I think it will have an adverse impact on us. It would be impossible for me to say exactly how many vendors would be affected.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Jerry.
Thank you.
Okay, if I could real quick. This ordinance was changed prior to the Paseo Festival, which was in the springtime. And as I recall, there was discussion about how it would affect other things going on in the city, and your Arts Festival was mentioned specifically. Were you or the college not aware of these changes that were going on then at all, and why wasn't this brought up then, if so?
Councilman Mars, we were made aware of those changes. Councilman Bowman made me aware of those changes, and it was my understanding that there was and I don't know what the problem was in the Paseo area, but it was my understanding that the action at that time was to deal with an issue the council had regarding that festival. And it was my understanding that there would be an opportunity to come back later and try to resolve any issues that might result negatively on the Arts Festival Oklahoma Festival.
In response to that, Councilman Walters and I both indicated this was going to be a problem, but agreed to go forward with this because of the concerns about trying to straighten out the deal about Paseo. Had I known we were going to get into this love-it-to-death situation that we're into now, I would have not ever voted for the Paseo thing until this was resolved. And I think Councilman Bowman will tell you, he and I had that conversation, that I was not willing to go forward at that time, except that there was an understanding that we would vet this at this time. Now we're vetting it to the point where we're going to create a problem for them. And they're not culpable in that. That was, Councilman Walters and I both had conversations from the Horseshoe and with Dr. Stewart about that.
Meg, do you want to say something?
Well, Jerry, just kind of a question and a comment, perhaps, and I really appreciate the time sensitivity of this, and so I think we're all trying to move forward to a solution that's equitable for everybody in the community, and we're really trying to reach a solution that works for all parties. And so my question would be, and there has been some discussion in the last couple of days about an amendment to this ordinance that would change the fee structure substantially from $50 per vendor. Is it possible that you would gain back some vendors that would come to the festival if the fee wasn't as burdensome on them?
If the fee was what?
If the fee was not as burdensome as the $50 fee that's in the current ordinance. And you suggested that that was a problem. You've had people say they wouldn't come because they couldn't pay the increase in the fee.
Yeah.
If it were not so much, might you not gain back people?
Councilwoman Salyer, I think that obviously any reduction in the fee perhaps would be helpful with some vendors, given the fact that we've just increased their fee $30 for the fire marshal's inspection. I think that any increase at this time is problematical. I can't say to you if the fee is $50, we're going to lose X number of vendors. I don't have control over that, but I do know that I do believe we'll lose some, and I do believe it will detract from our festival. And it's for that size festival, it's like taking $8,500 out of that.
In all fairness, for the Paseo Festival and for Kathy's Festival, there were approximately 74 permits issued under this new ordinance for that, and it took $3,500 out of her festival.
Yeah, I really can't comment on the Paseo situation. I've been told that the council was dealing with an issue there that really is beyond.
Well, and it repeats what we've heard around this Horseshoe multiple times now, is that we unfortunately or inadvertently adopted an ordinance citywide that was somewhat narrowly focused. I believe there is a way to fix this in a way that can be applied citywide that is fairer than exempting one after another entity.
All right. No, I find this, in some respect, it's to me an overkill as it relates to the different venues. We know for a fact that the issue with the Paseo, it probably should never even came to what it came to. Looking back, because in reality, it was nothing more than two interested parties having an interest in arts, one having private property, the other utilizing public easements and the streets. And we crafted, because of the bickering that existed there, we crafted an ordinance that created a separation in reference to fees and permits. And I dare say that you cannot find an institution of higher learning on their own property, bounded by their own security, their own parking that they own, from the entry to the exit, that you're going to find another organization that's going to come up on their grounds and establish an event without their permission and operate at the same time. And it would be the same thing if he was a church. You're not going to find a church that's going to have a festival on their grounds and have another organization impede upon their privacy. It's not going to happen. And so this issue that we talk about today, it is totally different. I regret that we had to address the issue with the Paseo looking back, because I think in reality it was really kind of petty. I really believe that this was a matter that we could have just been long gone, and you wouldn't be standing here and we wouldn't be having this debate, because I truly believe that there is a major difference, and I said it from the beginning, that churches and institutions of higher learning have a complete separate boundaries as it relates to these type of events. And you know, I just feel bad that we even having to discuss it now, because I think that the school is totally different, that the boundaries is secured, everything is owned by that institution. There is and never has been any competition in reference to other events on the grounds of that school. And I just think that we should let this go and move with it for the school to have the function that they've been having for the number of years that they started it, they built it. It is a revenue for the city of Oklahoma City. And, you know, I just don't see us, you know, getting any place with continuing to continue it, to debate it, you know, and I'm willing to even go back and go on record and say, if it came back in reference to Paseo, my vote would be totally different.
Okay. We do have one other person that signed up to speak. Do you want to go down that process? Jerry, thanks.
Thank you. Your Honor, if I may make one more comment. I want to say to you all that I realize the council deals with difficult issues where there are competing interests, and I want you all to know that we respect each and every member of the council, even those that may vote in a way that we would not desire, but we respect you and we respect your position, and we respect that you have to weigh competing interests, and we will continue to be a strong supporter of the city of Oklahoma City.
Thanks.
Okay. I just wanted to echo what Pete said. I think it was very eloquent, and I think where we are on this is we could take something that's been around for a very long time, and by just a few actions of the council, could actually begin the process of killing the Arts Festival. And I've seen it in a number of businesses in my area, where just a little bit of pressure from the city, for whatever reason, actually just kills a business. And so my biggest concern, I don't know that there's ever been any kind of public safety issue out there, but my concern is an effort for the city to protect people from themselves, that we would begin the process of killing that arts festival. And that's one of those things that once it starts down that hill, it won't come back. And it would absolutely break my heart to see something that is that iconic in South Oklahoma City, in an area that we don't have. Most of our stuff is residential. We don't have a lot of things like that out there, that we would look up in a few years and it would be just if it's still there, just a shell of its former self and insignificant. So I would plead with the council that allow Councilman White and myself and the people who have some regret over the Paseo, that we'd have the opportunity to fix this and allow the Arts Festival to continue and not have a regret in a few years that it's gone.
Okay. Kathy Jacobson. Good morning, Kathy. We'll need your name and address for the record.
Kathy Jacobson, 216 Northwest 16th, Oklahoma City. Thank you for allowing me to speak today. I would like to begin by mentioning that over 2 years ago, Councilman Bowman introduced a new city ordinance that would allow only nonprofit organizations to be entitled to a revocable right-of-way permit to settle a turf war in the Paseo. In 2009, Councilman Bowman maintained that the Paseo District should only allow for one revocable permit during Memorial Weekend. This was successfully passed under the guise of safety issues in a new city ordinance. It is my opinion that revocable permits are issued to enhance the safety features of an outdoor public event. If there's a safety concern for one business owner at any festival, then there should be the same civic-minded concern for all businesses. Also, if restrictions are placed on the number of revocable permits issued due to safety, then enforcing a required outdoor seller's license should be required for everyone selling outdoor goods. This was never about outdoor seller's licenses in the beginning. Let me go over that one again. I'm so nervous. I'm just not a good speaker in public. This was never about outdoor seller's licensing being enforced in the city or citywide only during my festival. I was told by a former member of the PAA that their backer turned me into licensing 5 years ago for not having my outdoor seller's permits. Licensing sent the police out on setup day and said everyone had to pack up and leave. That was the first time any of us had ever heard of an outdoor seller's license. During my 2009 festival on opening day, I had one artist that told me she had her outdoor seller's license, but in fact it was her state tax. She hadn't read any of my papers. When licensing arrived, they gave her 30 minutes to pack up and get out. She did, in tears. Now, where else in Oklahoma City has this happened? Nowhere else, I'm sure. To paraphrase Mr. Blummett, this was only intended for Velvet Elvis street peddlers, so why are we all here going over this? Another requirement placed on me by the city was a site plan to scale. And I would like to say that I've always had a site plan. How else could you have a festival? You've got 75, 80 booths out there. You have to know where they're all at and your porta potties and everything. When I approached several architects, many refused, stating that it was ludicrous to require such an elaborate plan for a temporary event, and in order to do so would cost over $1,000. Tell me how all the property owners in Oklahoma City are going to be able to get a site plan every time they have someone on their private property selling something outdoors. Take, for instance, the Old Paris Flea Market. They don't even know until Saturday morning who's going to be there to sell to the public. So how could they have a site plan? In the Plaza District, a site plan every month at the cost of $1,000? What about the gas station owners with their taco trucks? Can they afford a site plan, and can their outdoor sellers afford $50 every 3 months? This will only hurt business all over the city, and it would be impossible to enforce. It's only enforced on me, and I have followed all the rules and tried to do everything that the city asked me to do. In 2010, prior to my festival, Dennis Box, the PA's attorney, asked me to meet at the council conference room, and the city took my private property away from me on the festival weekend, knowing this would take 40 booths surrounding my building. 60 feet they took from behind the building on the south and the west side, and 80 feet in front from the north to the east. At a meeting with city staff, we asked if there were any setbacks in the Paseo, and we were informed at that time no setbacks in the Paseo. Fire Inspector Rodney Houston told me opening day of the festival this year that he only needed 20 feet of right-of-way for a fire truck. After all this regarding the right-of-way in front of my building, the PAA set up their booths right in front of my building all the way down Walker without even asking me. The artists around my building were there for 8 years, and they never did any harm or danger to anyone. I resent the statement regarding my festival being unclean and unorderly in prior years. I have always had a cleanup crew, porta potties, security, tall dumpster, a $1 million liability insurance policy. And the streets around my building have always been open for the fire lane. We've never had anything in the streets. If the city were to want to question the issue of safety, they should be questioning how an emergency vehicle could get down Paseo Street during the festival. Sorry. If the personality conflict has indeed been fixed by in the Paseo Art District, then I question why the PAA solicited the lot owner behind me just last week in an attempt to outbid me for space used by my artists for the last 4 years. There's another 45 booths I lose right there. They also said they needed to take over my space in order to make more money next year. I believe the actual reason for initiating this ordinance was to systematically reduce the competition for space during the Paseo weekend. This ordinance is unjustly weighing the balance to favor the PAA by abusing this city's government to settle a turf war.
Kathy, thanks.
Thank you.
Pete, what do you want to do from here?
Well, I understand all the other, there are all these myriad of concerns that appear to be legitimate. I would like to find something so I could give the community college some assurance of what they can do, so they could go forward with their festival and know what the rules are going to be. I think it is totally unwieldy for someone who totally controls the site the way they do to be asked to have, for each individual to get a permit. I think that's a mistake, because the community college totally controls the site. There aren't any streets closed. They have in the past complied with the rules. I thought I had it figured out until the last couple of days when other things became important, and we're trying to solve, again, we're trying to solve multiple problems when I only have one in front of me. I want to get this solved for the community college so they can go forward. So we're going to try to I think we could carve the institution of higher learning out of this, charge them a flat $500 fee or a $250 fee or some fee, and let them be responsible for that.
Why can't we do that?
Well, I'd like to do that. That's what I'd like to do. I don't have.
Wouldn't that require a change in our ordinance that we've got on the books, though?
What?
Wouldn't that require an ordinance that we have an ordinance that requires outdoor sellers permits? And all the conditions that you mentioned, private property, control of the property, exist every time we issue a permit under this because it's directed towards private property. Before we vote on this, should we put other exclusions in here so we won't have to go through the same argument in another week? Should we put charitable organizations, churches, Elks Lodges, whatever that fits in here? I really think what we ought to do is turn down this amendment and go back and look at the ordinance again. And maybe we just need to do away with the ordinance. Maybe we need to modify it. But I think that the practice of continuing what we did the first time, and that is use a single solution to solve a single problem, and it impacts everybody. This is exactly what we're doing right now.
Okay. Let's let Meg talk.
Well, Mayor, I was just going to say, this is part of the conversation that we've all been having, is to try to figure out a way that is inclusive of everybody, that would, I think there's understanding on everybody's part that having an outdoor seller's permit or a peddler's permit should be required in the case of a single vendor. If you're an ice cream guy going through a neighborhood, or if you're selling velvet Elvises on the corner, I think our citizens have some degree of, or we should have some degree of responsibility that person has had a background check and has a permit. But when you begin to talk about festivals, whether they're at the college or whether they're in the Paseo or somewhere else, you've got an organizing body that is accepting artists, that's bringing in, that has an application process, that juries or doesn't jury their folks. And I think that responsibility of vetting their people should go to the organizing entity rather than to the city. So what we've been discussing here is kind of a sliding scale. If an event might be 2 vendors to 10 vendors, then the organizer would make an application to the city and would pay us a permit fee. If it was 10 to 25, they might pay a slightly different fee because there would be a little bit more work involved. If it's, there's a way to work this out where it would reduce that $50 fee per vendor and make it somewhat more reasonable, but it would continue to provide the safety verifications, the setbacks, and it's easy to apply citywide. It doesn't single out the Paseo. It doesn't single out Oklahoma City Community College. It doesn't exempt people. It could be applied across the board. And Dan Brummett is working on some language for us. I really, this would be easier to do, Pete, if we weren't on summer schedule and we could have a week to bring it forward. And I'm sorry, that a lot of this discussion happened in just the last couple of days. But I think we can do better. And I'm totally supportive of the college. But as I said to Jerry when we met personally, I have difficulty voting for this amendment because I just don't think it's fair to everybody else involved.
All right. Skip, did you want to say something?
In respect to Councilman Salyer's comments, I just think that any time you start putting a sliding scale issue, because you're never going to be able to know exactly, what your numbers are. And for a person to come in and give an application, say that they have 10, they're going to have 10 vendors and they should only be charged $100, when in fact, once the event is, happens, they have 200 vendors, and you don't have any recourse to go back and say, well, you submitted an application for 100, we gave you a sliding scale, and we came out here and did an inspection, you have 200. I personally think that we ought to look at this, first of all, from the location, and you have an institution that has absolutely nothing that will occur on those grounds that's going to impede anything out in the general public. Absolutely nothing. And I think that from day one, they've had every issue of emergency care. Staff there on the institution has one of the best paramedic programs in the state that's already there on the institution. I don't know of one incident where they've had an issue of any safety concerns, where any tents fell down, where anyone was injured. There's always been, a concern to make sure that this is a safe outdoor event. Now, the design of that institution, they could just as well, if the weather got bad, had their program inside. Would you consider that being different? I mean, if you look at the structure of the institution, they could have just as well had, if the weather got inclement, they could have their whole event up under the roof of the institution. And it would still be an arts festival. And I just think that there are some parameters that we could seriously consider, as Councilman White has stated, that just because of the institution, it is their land, they don't have one issue of people parking on other people's property. All the utilities are maintained on the college grounds. And for every day that they're there, they're running up whatever utility bills, they're paying a fee for it. And I just think that, we could exempt this issue And if we want to come back and revisit this whole issue of outdoor peddlers, I think we've put everybody that's standing on a corner, if a person's standing on a corner asking for $1 and playing a guitar, have him to come down here and apply for a permit, and you got that person in the same bucket with an institution of higher learning of this magnitude? Come on, we can do better than this. I just think that, and regretfully about the first issue of this Paseo, and now we look at this institution, and I think it is totally, totally different. The only thing that has any resemblance to Paseo and OCCC is the fact that you're going to call it an outdoor event. That's the only difference.
Okay, Brian? All the criticism of Councilman White's proposal here, whether it's unfair to other people or we can go back and revisit it, all those things may be true, but they are also true originally when the ordinance was first introduced. All those things held, but we argued it the other way then. And by doing that, we have created this problem. The community college does not stand before us because of a problem that they have that just has always been. We created this issue. So what I would ask is that if this is something we want to revisit, which I would be a strong supporter of, let's go ahead and allow them this change so that they can get on with their festival this year and go back and revisit it in whole and not put them at a disadvantage and say, well, we've reconsidered, we think we're going to revisit it, but even though it's a bad thing, you guys get to pay the price for it. We can go back and revisit it all we want to, but I think that making the community college pay the price for something that we are second guessing, I think is just unjust. And I would ask that this be put forward with the understanding we will come back and revisit it in whole, but that they don't have to single-handedly pay the price for it for something we want to change.
Okay. Gary?
Well, I've got some comments, and then I'll end up with a question that hadn't even been brought up yet. But all of the things that I hear of the reason why this is different, I don't think it is. Totally on their own land, totally contained in, not closing any streets. Kathy's was exactly the same way. Totally on land that she controls or owns, and she didn't close the streets. The Revocable did from the Paseo Artists Association. The holding off, cooling down, changing, whatever it is you want to talk about doing for the college so that they can have their event, we rushed to put through something back in the springtime to get it done before the Paseo Festival that impacted a small business owner. Why are we concerned now? Is it because it's just this major institution out here? Why weren't we concerned about that small business owner back then? There was plenty of comments made, including some from myself, that this was going to have impacts we hadn't even thought of yet. But we still seem to be in a rush to get it done before this year's festival. There's been some discussion that I'm either against OCCC or I'm against their festival, which is absolutely not true. And I had a discussion with Dr. Sechrest this morning to make sure he understood that I don't have a problem with the college or him or anybody else, and I love that festival out there. I don't have a problem with it at all. I wished we had never done this to cause them to have the problem that they have. But we did. It's an equitability issue for me. We're taking all this discussion today and we're thinking about changing something back or holding off on something for an institution with the resources that it has, not only administratively but financially, when we weren't going to do the same thing for a small business owner and a private individual. And she's already paid those fees. If we hold off and make them not pay the fees, are we going to reimburse her? Because we pushed it through in time to get it done by her. And I'm not changing my position from voting yes on the ordinance change, because I made it very clear that if we're going to change this ordinance, there was a provision in the original draft, if you remember, to exempt these kind of institutions. And there was a discussion made on the horseshoe saying that we shouldn't do that. It ought to be equitable for everybody. And that was taken out, and that's why I voted for the ordinance. And now all of a sudden we're coming back and we're wanting to change the ordinance again, which I don't have a problem doing. But I think if we're going to take the time to research what's fair and equitable, we need to do something to go back to help that small business owner that we penalized in a rush to get it done. It's just an equitability issue to me, and there's nothing else about it. The safety issues, yes, we want to have all of that done, but that's always been done. The fire has always done permits, and they've always done site plans, and they've always figured out whether they can provide those services or not, and police and so forth. This was a civil issue down there that we tried to cure with this thing, and now look where it's gotten us throughout all of this. So I'm not changing positions because I really wasn't in favor of it to begin with, but it seemed to be the wish of the council to get something done. We were told this needed to be fixed throughout the whole city for all those peddlers on the corners and all the things that go on that we really didn't have much of a structure for. This was going to help that too. Well, so far the only two things we've talked about is the Paseo Festival and now the OCCC Festival. So again, I'll go back. This has got to be handled in a way that's equitable, not only from this point forward, but for what we made some people do back when we changed this thing to begin with, for me to be very happy about it at all. And then I'll get to my one question. Colic doesn't own that land. The state of Oklahoma owns that land. Is that correct?
No, sir, that's not correct. The Board of Regents of Oklahoma City Community College owns the land. You may be referring to, in prior years, the commissioners of the land office owned the land. The land was deeded to the College Board of Regents, I would say approximately 10 to 12 years ago.
I thought all higher education land was owned by the state. I guess I'm wrong in that assumption.
No, sir, it's obviously owned by a state agency, but the Board of Regents of Oklahoma City Community College have title to the property. As I say, it was previously owned by the...
But that's a state agency.
We are a state agency.
Can we enforce city ordinances on state property?
The enforcement, as long as it's for what the purpose is, that their governmental purposes they're designed to achieve, probably not. But for a private enterprise on state property, generally we can regulate that.
Okay. Councilman Mars, I appreciate that question, but I can tell you that we are going to be cooperative with the city council, with the city authorities of whatever decisions made, whether or not technically we have to comply. We're going to be cooperative with the city.
Thanks, Jerry. Yeah, Sam?
Mayor, we can exempt the college as a single entity, or if Councilman Wright could be assured that the tenor of this council would be to look at eliminating vendor fees entirely for outside sales permits and look at a single application fee. And that's why I think Meg's pursuit is going to take more than today. A single application fee that would be based on simply the recovery cost to the city on the staff time to review site plan, whatever else is involved, on the actual recovery cost. If the council were agreeable to that, and Mr. White, I'd just ask if, with that assurance, that that's where we're going in 2 weeks to get to that point for an ordinance revision that applies across the board to outside sellers on a single permit, not a vendor permit, a single application permit based on recovery of staff cost. Even if it were 2 weeks and you knew that's what we were headed, to just bring back that cost, is that something that holds you up unnecessarily if you had the intent of council?
Councilman, Bowman, if we had that assurance, I think we could proceed with our plans in a reasonable fashion.
I move we continue at 2 weeks, subject to doing it.
Second. All right. Any other comments or questions on item 10A?
I would just like to ask one question.
It is my understanding, excuse me, Skip, but I've already chewed out one guy for interrupting me. It is I would like for everyone to think about how they're going to vote on this. If you vote yes on this continuance, I'm going to expect that you're going to be supportive of what we're trying to do. If you don't, I would want you to vote no on the continuance. We'll get it over with today. I mean, I think that's not unfair to ask if you want to vote yes, then vote yes, that you'll agree with the conditions that we put out here. You're not legally bound to do that, but it seems to me you're ethically and morally bound to do that, because we need a read on what's going to happen, because they need a better read on what's going to happen.
All right. Larry?
I would like to just address your question and see if I understand what you're talking about, Meg, and that is that in 2 weeks there would be before the council an ordinance that would have a way to permit an event on private land whereby the person who is putting that particular event on, in this case OCC, but in the future any other one, that they would pay one permit fee, and that would cover that particular event. And that what needs to be worked out then is there a sliding scale or not, how much the permit fee would be or not, but there would be one ordinance that would cover OCC, would cover the Paseo Festival, would cover Plaza, and every other one.
Would it cover also the individual seller?
Well, there was I guess, Pat, in the information that Meg gave me, she talked to me earlier about the fact that there would be a 10 vendor, a 10 participant, or some minimum participant that would kick in this one fee fits all. But if you were a onesie person, that would not be covered by this ordinance. So that would be the individual.
Yeah, Pat, it was sort of my thought process that individual vendor still ought to get a permit.
That was my concern. If we had this scale of 10 or more, I think what happens to those who are just a single individual selling Elvis?
Yeah, I believe the single individual continues to need a permit. Okay. But I think what we're trying to address are sponsored events by a legitimate organization that would simply pay a permit fee. It would continue to carry the rest of the things that this new ordinance does in terms of site plans and safety and all those other things. But it would address each one of our districts. It wouldn't single out one. And the way in my own mind I've tried to liken it is essentially a revocable permit on private property. We have revocables available for public property where they pay a fee, and they provide insurance, and that's all that's required. It's a similar concept, but applicable to private property.
And I would like for Dan to give a report as soon as possible on whether or not we even have the authority, based upon the legal status of the institution, whether or not we even have the authority to be in this debate in the first place.
All right. And I can support what Pete's saying, with the caveat that you're talking about just changing the ordinance in general for an event to do a single permit versus the way it's amended or proposed today is to exempt educational institutions. You're not wanting to exempt anybody. You're simply wanting to make a provision to create an event permit.
Listening to the fact that I can't get 5 votes for anything else, but that's fine. No, I agree.
Okay. Pete, did you make a motion?
Yes, I move that we continue for 2 weeks with the understanding that we're going to have it ready to go.
I'm going to vote before I turn around to see if anybody else wants to say anything.
Well, Skip may have something. Skip may have one last comment. I owe him one.
A vote to continue means what? I mean, it's continued, but does that automatically give a vote when it comes back in 2 weeks?
No, I can't bind you to do that. I was just trying to hurt your feelings if you don't.
Cast your vote. Passes unanimously. Item 10B deals with taxi cabs in general. You may recall, I guess it was over a year ago, I asked Councilman Bowman to head up a subcommittee that would look at the taxi cab regulations in the city of Oklahoma City, and as the city grew and we knew there might be more taxi business down the line, how we might need to change our ordinances. And I think Councilman Bowman back to kind of give us an update on what's occurred since that time.
I think Amy Douglas is here to help do that, Mayor, if it's all right.
Good morning. We have been working on revisions to Chapter 56 for a couple of years. The police department and licensing came to me several years ago and expressed their concerns about problems they had with enforcing and administering the current ordinance. And the ordinance as it stands has not really been comprehensively reviewed or amended in over 20 years. So it was really time to take a good look at it. In the midst of working on those revisions, we encountered some issues with one of our licensed taxi companies, and that's when we had some hearings in front of council, and the mayor formed the taxi task force. And one of the issues and one of the directives to the task force was to try to make it a little easier for new startup taxi companies and just to help these companies in their operations. We had several meetings of the task force with representatives of the taxi industry present, and at the conclusion of that task force, there were some issues left unresolved that were referred to the Traffic Commission, having to deal some with the taxi industry and some having to do with other vehicles for hire that we really weren't dealing with at the taxi task force. And the Traffic Commission formed a subcommittee to deal with these issues, which met several times, and also had meetings with industry to get their input and make sure that we were headed in the right direction. So the proposed new version of Chapter 56, which you have before you, is the culmination of all these efforts. In your packet, you'll find an extensive list, a summary of all the changes that we have made from analyzing the current Chapter 56 with what we're proposing. And some of those more significant changes include we've attempted to make it easier in our application process and in our operating requirements for companies to operate, and especially for smaller companies to start up. We've also addressed where the ordinances were out of date, making enforcement and administration difficult. We have business licenses will be granted through the Traffic Commission and take away the City Council approval of that recommendation. And appeals of denials of issuances of business license will go to a license appeal board, which has already been established in Chapter 26. And this is consistent with how other business licenses are handled. The police department did request that a new inspection requirement was added for vehicles that are 3 years older or have more than 150,000 miles, and this was due to their concerns about the safety and appearance of many of the older vehicles that are operating currently. We've modified the revocation and suspension proceedings and the grounds that would allow for revocation and suspension, giving some consideration to companies who employ independent contractors. And special provisions were added to deal with unlawful refusals of service, which was the original issue that prompted the mayor's task force. An entirely new section was added about refusals, which allows for periodic compliance checks by the police department, hearings, penalties, and administrative fees to be assessed against companies. And then revocation and suspension hearings will also be directed to the License Appeal Board rather than City Council. Provisions were also added. We'd never had any provisions before in Chapter 56 to deal with the Americans with Disabilities Act, and we have set forth several requirements regarding the service level that must be provided to persons with disabilities. In all, I think we've met the objectives that were outlined by the task force without sacrificing the health, safety, or welfare of the public. Does anybody have any questions?
Sam?
Just one, Amy. Comment first. I think some of the issues that Amy highlighted, periodic compliance checks, the ADA conformity, making it easier, as we saw this morning, not in the appeal process, but at least in the application process, to encourage new applicants. That company today was a result of that. The only thing with regard to appeals, Amy asked, that appeal, if we approve this ordinance, that appeal would not come to council. It goes to the administrative.
That's right. It would go to a License Appeal Board.
Tell us just who that constitutes.
That is made up of the city manager or his designee, the finance director or his designee, and the public works director or designee.
Okay.
Okay.
It also saves time. The gentleman who was here to get his certificate of convenience and necessity was very upset because he had to go through so many different public hearings. First Traffic Commission, and then it took a while to get it on council docket because of the appeal. So issues like that, people could get their license in a more expedited manner this way.
All right. Okay, we have a motion and a second to adopt the ordinance that the task force has come forward with. Any other comments or questions? What did I say? Okay, my mistake. Introduce it. We have a motion and a second. Any other comments or questions on 10B? All right, cast your votes. That item is introduced. On to item 10C. This is an item that Councilman Kelly would like to visit, and this is dealing with the parking fines.
This matter has been brought as a result of some of the previous increases on parking, and as I was advised from our municipal councilor's office that when they started looking at the yard parking, the issue as it relates to sidewalk parking, in reference to the other parking ordinances, that these matters had not been addressed in probably 15 years, and try to have some balance as it relates to the increased fees that we had previously passed. Ms. Cindy Richards and her staff has been working on a revision of some of our other parking assessments, and I would like for her to come forward and give a presentation as it relates to what her findings were.
Thank you, Councilman. Mayor and Council, I'm Cindy Richard. I'm Division Head over Criminal Justice. We received a request from Councilman Kelly to look at a couple of parking violations, and as the conversations over that developed, we determined that it would be better to look at the fine schedule in a comprehensive approach. You can kind of tell that over history it's kind of been piecemealed a little bit. Some of the categories didn't exactly make sense, and there wasn't consideration, it didn't appear given to, as far as fines and the amount of fines, to those more hazardous parking situations. Now, I should be clear that all parking offenses are a Class A offense and have a maximum fine of $500 in cost. However, by statute, this governing body is authorized to set a fine schedule by which a person can come in and pay their fine to close out their case, so setting it at something less than the maximum of $500. And so you have the fine schedule currently in place, and due to technical drafting requirements, you can see that it's kind of a conglomerated mess. What I did, Josh, if you wouldn't mind going to the next page, is put together how it will ultimately look should you adopt all of these changes. Now, I can tell you essentially that the analysis and review went through the police department, fire department, public works, and development services. They've all had an opportunity to give input to this, and this is the result of a lot of their concerns. What we've done is that any fire-related parking violations, and that would be like blocking a fire lane, blocking a fire hydrant, blocking a fire station driveway, and then there's also a flammable tank truck parking ordinance. Those are all the fire parking violations that could cause immediate harm to life and property if a fire truck can't get where it needs to be and get the water that it needs to get. So that's been recommended at the highest fine of these amendments, which is $100, and then after 10 days, if it's unpaid, it would be $125. The next layer of hazardous parking primarily arises from 32-304, which has 15 different types of parking violations. And they include such things as parking within an intersection, parking on a crosswalk, parking on a sidewalk, some types of hazardous parking with close to a safety zone. Those all are things that could tend to lead to hazardous situations for both other vehicles that are moving as well as pedestrians. So that's the next level of fine, and it's been proposed at $50 and then $70 after 10 days. I noticed when we were going through this that improper tag display was different if you were parked than it was in the fine schedule if you were driving, and I thought that those should be evened out. So that amendment will even it out with if you're driving with it. Physically disabled parking is, we currently have it as called handicap parking. I don't know how it ended up at some point in time in the past in the traffic schedule of fines. It should be in the parking schedule of fines, so it's been moved over. The name changed. The fine remains the same at $150 and $200 after 10 days. Police requested that trespassing vehicles be at $50 and $70. And the presiding judge has had some concerns for a few years over the parking meter violations and asked that those go to $15 and $24. In dealing with this fine schedule, we had to adjust a couple of other ordinances, primarily 32-304, for consistency's sake. That's the one with the 15 hazardous parking violations. And then also we have to amend the traffic schedule of fines to take the handicap parking from there and put it where it belongs appropriately in the parking schedule of fines. And with that, I'll be glad to answer any questions you may have.
All right, Cindy, there's been some questions in reference to the physically disabled parking. The governor signed a bill, I believe it was last month, that gave the fine as $500 for physically disabled parking. Is that correct?
That is correct. We tracked that bill very closely. Oklahoma Municipal League also tracked it very closely. The preemptive language that started out in the bill was removed during the legislative process, so we are not preempted and we are not required to raise that fine to $500, which would be the maximum of our jurisdiction and more than any of our traffic moving violations also.
Thank you.
Just a quick clarification. On the residential yard parking, that includes front, side, and back as well, or just the front yard?
My understanding is now with the amendment that you made I guess it was about a month ago, that it's front, side, and back.
Okay. I wanted to make that point clear because I've had some questions on that from my constituents, that it covers any place on the property that's not paved suitable for parking.
That's my understanding.
Thank you.
Councilman, I also wanted to let you know that in 32-304, one of the amendments that we're making has to do with planting strips. And I'm ashamed to say, as the head of prosecution, I didn't know what that was, but I checked and found out, and it's the area between the curb and the sidewalk, the street curb and the sidewalk, generally speaking. And so I had concerns because that is a lower fine. When it goes through with 32-304 amendment, it'll be $50, and I didn't want any misunderstanding that it would conflict with residential yard parking, and so we're adding the language non-residential planting strip, so that residential yard parking will remain intact with what you did a month ago.
Larry?
This is a cry for help. Cindy, this is not really directed at you. And Jim, if you could help me out. In 32-304, the owner or operator of a vehicle or its cargo that obstructs the regular flow of traffic is a violation. And what I've had reported to me is that with this recent round of storms, there are a number of people who have come into Oklahoma City that have large, wide types of flatbed vehicles that they're stacking up roofing material in there as they're doing roof repair, and then they're taking them into residential areas at night and parking them. And so my question is, can somebody please give me some help on where I need to go? I don't need the answer here, but it's a cry for help. And I don't know whether any of you have had any complaints like that or not, especially in the older residential areas where the streets are narrow. Having these people store this material overnight is causing some concern in some of our neighborhoods.
There's a current restriction in the zoning ordinance about cargo trailers parked in residential areas. So if If you could identify those locations, we may be able to work it as a zoning violation.
So I recall it as a zoning violation?
That's correct. That's already in the ordinance.
Okay, and you're not going to like the next one, the way you catch them is at night and on the weekends.
Well, we work some weekends. And
All right. Councilman White?
Have we have any estimate of how much additional revenue this would generate?
Well, you know, Councilman, it's very hard for me as head of prosecution to talk about generating revenue because I don't see them as going hand in hand. But when you take the average number of citations that we've seen in prior years and look at the amount of the increases, the court administrator has indicated that he thinks that'll be about $200,000 a year when a full year is underway.
All right. All right, we have a motion and a second to introduce item 10C. Cast your votes. Passed unanimously. Item 10D is from Councilwoman Sawyer. It deals with a number of panhandling issues.
Mike, I don't think it's a surprise to anyone that we have in this community seen an incredible increase of folks standing in public medians soliciting funds from people. And I spoke with Chief City about this issue. I know he's had a concern about it for quite a while. And Assistant Municipal Councilor Tina Hughes has helped draft some new ordinance language. Tina, do you want to talk a little bit about what we've done?
The changes in this ordinance basically are that it includes walking in the roadways as much as standing in the roadways. People that stand in the roadways are so obviously a traffic hazard that was pretty much understood. But what happens is the people that are standing on the sides of the roads or in the medians will come walking through traffic to collect whatever donations they are hoping to receive, and they've become a traffic hazard there too. Medians had been excluded from this, I think mostly as an oversight when the ordinance was originally done. And my experience has been that there are an awful lot of people parked in the medians doing the same thing. They're at least as much of a hazard as the people on the side of the road, probably more, because they're between opposing lanes of traffic. So what this does is try to tighten that up some. I did, these are, I believe, reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions on speech, because courts have determined that asking for solicitations is a First Amendment speech activity, but it can be restrained in a reasonable time, place, and manner way. This has nothing to do with the content of what anybody is saying, so I think it's legally it's very defensible and very even-handed. So.
And I think it's just also important to point out that the ordinance does allow for groups to apply for a permit from the city, so whether it's our firefighters that have their boot drive or other legitimate organizations can come apply. It's a $200 permit fee. They're required,
and they have to obtain an insurance bond.
And they're required to list the name of the organization and every person that would be soliciting, so that that is still permitted. But this is an attempt to help get folks off our medians and in a hazardous situation, both for the drivers and the individuals.
Does the permit allow somebody then to be in the street or in the medians?
Yes.
Okay, so it's a hazard condition, but if you have a permit, you could continue to engage in that hazardous condition.
Well,
in those cases, those individuals working for organizations are restricted to doing that one or two times a year.
Five consecutive days, I think, and it's between.
They have to. The insurance bonds that they have to provide to us cover for any, they cover our tort liability and theirs for that activity. Whereas now, these people are out begging for funds. They will have no means of compensating anybody for anything that happens.
No, but they still constitute a hazard, both to themselves and the driver, even though they have a permit. And that troubles me a little bit.
All right.
One question I have, and I I hate to see some of the areas that people are saturating there. I mean, just saturated in certain areas on corners and intersections. And I wish for a long time that there was some way that we could address the issue. But it brings another question, and that is, you know, you have a lot of these children activities, which I hate to see, that they have from baseball to football to basketball programs, and you got the adults that's out with car washes on one side of the street and the kids over on the intersection running up to cars. Would this address, I mean, is this...
I think my experience with those kinds of things, like the church is having a car wash over here in this parking lot, and they want you to come over, mostly they're...
Well, not so much just the parking lot, but you have, you know, like last Saturday, it was a football team, and at 23rd and Broadway, I mean, they had both sides of the street just saturated with kids running up to cars.
That's already in violation of city ordinances. And certainly this would apply.
Brian?
Make it quick, I promise.
Okay.
How does the solicitation of change or things like that at, say, on a public parcel, say a gas station, they're just sitting next to the door, is that more of a civil matter between the gas station and those people?
If they're doing that at a gas station on private property, if the private property owner does not wish for them to be there, they can tell them to move and then swear out a trespassing citation, which is, we can't do that along the streets.
All right. Meg, what do you want to do from here?
I would move the item for introduction.
All right. We have a motion and a second. We're voting on item 10D. Cast your votes. That item is introduced. Council comments. Gary's shaking his head. Sam, do you have anything for us today?
Are we going to review this report from Fishing and Boating, or Game Commission, Fish and Game Commission?
Okay.
We'll do that in a minute.
On that.
We'll do that in a minute under city manager reports.
Okay. One thing, then, if I could, Mayor. The year 2010, I don't know, 4 years ago, was set as target frame, that the animal shelter would be a no-kill shelter in Oklahoma City. That time's come, and it's going to go, and we won't be there. No question about it, budget constraints has been part of that. But in light of putting that off, I want to say that 5 of the last 6 months, where we have just done so extremely well, is with the adoption program. In the 5 of the last 6 months, animals leaving the shelter alive has been greater than the number euthanized. And that number leaving alive, a large part of that is influenced by our new aggressive efforts in adoption. Has really been key to that success. But we're still a ways away from becoming a no-kill shelter. The shelter knows, the literature says, what we all know if we've read it, is that you cannot adopt your way out. You can't simply achieve a no-kill target in a community by adopting. You can't either by spay and neutering. It takes spay and neutering, adoption like we're doing, and a lot more public education. So what I'm requesting is that the Animal Welfare Department take a look and give us a report as to what will it take to address. And I think it's going to mean address the spay and neutering in the way that we've done with adoption. And there's attendant cost to that. I understand there's going to be cost to that. But I would like to see from the staff report in the future, in 2 to 3 years, to put off the no-kill target for another 2 to 3 years, what would it take us to get to that no-kill target in 2 to 3 years by stepping up an aggressive spay and neutering program as we've done with adoption and the attendant costs? And that's why I say 2 to 3 years, because it's not anything in this budget year. We're going to remedy. I understand that. But I think it's important to keep that in front of us. We had it for 2010. We aren't going to make that. Let's just look ahead. What's it going to take to get there?
Yeah, and additionally, if this is feasible, what are the cost savings to having that down to use zero? If we got the euthanization down to zero of adoptable animals, what would the cost savings of that be, and would that somehow justify an increase in the spay and neutering budget? I'd just like to see the math. Don't pretend to know the answer or even guess what it might be. Yeah, Sam, go ahead.
One other thing, Mayor. With the 2 bicycle fatalities this weekend, it's even more of concern when it comes a little closer to home. The man that was killed out on Britton Road on Sunday morning was a longtime partner of Amy Douglas's, a business partner, and just gets a little closer to home when we see that. And I appreciate your comments in this morning's paper, Mayor, about, I think we just have to do a lot more of that, of the need to recognize, both for the rider as well as the automobile driver, the care that needs to be taken, because bicycle riders are not going away. And it's very apparent to me, who's out 3-4 times a week, trails and other places. It's increasing. And the care that we both need to be more cognizant of, both as bike riders and vehicle drivers, is just vitally important. I think it, too, maybe suggests, as we look at the MAPS 3 prioritizing, that that's laid out for us, as we heard today, the completion, at least of the additional miles that are going to connect our lakes and trails, that we really look to advance the priority of getting that out early, that completion of the trails project. I think it will help, without question, to get some more people off the roads.
All right. Larry?
Just a quick comment on that, and Jim, you could help me out here. I go back and forth across the Oklahoma River a number of times during the week, and one of the most underused, safest areas to ride a bicycle is the Oklahoma River Trail. Is that a correct assumption, the length of the trail right now?
Well, it is, because of the fact that there's no vehicular interface. You
And there's
you go underneath all the roads as you go down there.
And there's no construction that would inhibit a rider from going from one end to the other.
We do have a little construction on the south and on the east side, where we're putting in a new ramp at this point in time, but it's only knocks about a 3/4 of a mile off the trail, and it should be done within the next few weeks.
So if you're looking for a good, safe place to ride, I'd recommend the Oklahoma River Trail. It's very underused, and it's a beautiful trail. Thank you, Your Honor.
Keith? Brian? Meg?
Very brief comments. I did have a chance to go down to the Bricktown Arts Festival on Saturday that we talked about 2 weeks ago, and it was, I think, a nice success. It was sure hot down there, but there were interesting vendors, and I just wanted to compliment them for doing a good job. And just briefly, I guess on Thursday night, a group, kind of a new group of history buffs called Retro Metro got together, sort of spearheaded by some of our folks here. Francis was there, and Steve Lackmeyer is maybe leading the charge. And this group is looking for all sorts of memorabilia and history. They had restaurant, matchbooks and restaurant menus from places that have gone away recently. And it was just really, it was a good evening, and I really want to compliment them for working hard to save great parts of Oklahoma history.
All right. Skip?
I would like to thank the South Chamber of Commerce for inviting me to their Coffee with the Councilman last Thursday. Very, very warm reception that they had. I'd like to thank all the sponsors and the South Chamber of Commerce, and my two co-councilmen, Brian and Pete, were there to support me, and Mr. Dennis Clowers. So I really thank you all for being there, and they were very, very in tune with some of the major issues that the city is presently addressing. And so it's a very strong Chamber of Commerce, and I've been pleased for the 2 times that I've been invited there, the reception they've given, and just want to thank you. And they think the city is doing great things with the leadership of our mayor.
Pat?
I'd just like to make a brief comment about the bicycle situation. We need to really work on education in terms that there's shared space. car drivers enjoy a significant advantage over bicycles because of the armor they're carrying around with them. I had a constituent call in, though, with a interesting comment. She was driving on Hefner Road below the dam, and that's the suggested speed limit there is 45 miles an hour. The traffic moves through there at a minimum of 45 miles an hour. There was a bicyclist on the stretch of that road east of Meridian on the roadway, and this lady said that he was causing a traffic problem because people were slowing down and passing him to allow the 36 inches that's required by law. Just north, on the north side of that room, there's a bicycle trail. And I would encourage bicyclists, whenever they are available, to utilize those bicycle paths and stay off the road, because I think it just provides a source of irritation for car drivers that carries on well beyond the incident that they're involved in. Cities made a significant investment in bicycle trails, and I'd like to encourage bicyclists, when they are available, to use them for their own safety and for the goodwill that would engender between the bicycles and automobile drivers there.
All right. Thanks, Pat. City manager reports.
Mr. Mayor, in your packet is a memo regarding fishing and boating permits that Councilman Bowman brought up just a minute ago. And I apologize, but there's a band in there that you can't read very well of what the existing permits are. When I signed it, you could read it, but I don't know what happened in the process. But for fishing permits, the existing permits are $3 for daily and $15 for annual. We had three options that were taken to the Game and Fish Commission to take a look at the fishing. They came back and recommended that we go with a $5 daily and an annual fee of $25 on that. They did not discuss boating at the last Game and Fish Commission. They will be doing that at the next Game and Fish Commission. And when we do that, we'll bring back to you recommendations on both fishing and boating from the Game and Fish Commission. Although if you have some input you'd like to give us at this point regarding the fishing portion of it or either part of it, we'd be happy to take those comments.
I'm looking at a option 2 sort of thing, $5 daily, but $25 on an annual permit. Is that what they're recommending?
That's what they recommended, sir. Well, that isn't, yeah, they came back with a recommendation other than one of the three options that we had laid out.
Jim, as I understood the proposition that we made, and Godfrey was here to, Richard Godfrey was here to acknowledge that, and I called him again last night just to see if we're on the same page. And I don't know how the mix-up happened on their agenda. I don't think that's worth getting into, but our understanding was that we asked the Fish and Game Commission, that was the way we voted to get the $75,000 of general revenue money, that the other half would be met by increasing fishing and boating permit fees. And what we have before us is our options, including theirs, that give us the half, the $75,000 or more from them, just by the increase on fishing, annual and daily fishing license. With their next meeting, they're going to look at increasing, to some extent, the boating fees as well. That will reduce the amount of fee increase for fishing license. And unless the clock started, Jim, I just think we ought to give them time, one more meeting at their August meeting.
I agree with that.
To come up with a combination of boating and fishing and meet us halfway.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Okay. All right. Anything else from city manager report?
One thing about that. Is there some restriction on the boating and fishing fees gauged by our cost of administering it like it is in other areas?
That's always a criteria that you take a look at when you establish fees or the cost of providing those services.
Right.
I don't know if we've gotten into it in any great detail on this, Wendell, do you?
It would seem to me it'd be much more difficult to assess a cost to a fishing license because of the cost of providing the lake and everything else that goes into it. But I just wondered if there's not some...
I think it may be more with fees than licenses.
Okay. It probably is. If we call it a license, I guess we're probably all right. All right. That's good enough. Unless you want to talk.
Well, if you wish, sir.
No.
As far as the assessment on boating, what is the recommended amount?
Well, that has not gone to the Game and Fish. They're going to look at that at their August meeting and make some recommendations and get back to us, and then we'll bring a total package back to you after that as to what the fee increases are being proposed to be.
But it will be part of the revenue to support the
fish hatchery.
The fish hatchery.
That's the direction. Right, and let me be very clear on this. Right now, that the fishing permits do go back to generate support for the fish hatchery. The boating permits presently do not. They go to the Water Utilities Trust and what's called non-rate dollars, and those non-rate dollars the Water Utilities Trust uses, along with other things. They put oil and gas revenues in there and some other recreational revenues that they have. And they use that to do picnic tables or fishing docks or things that they cannot use rate monies for. You can't pay your water bill and use that money to put recreation improvements at the lakes. So they use that money for those purposes. But what the council suggested at the time, or what I heard the council suggested, we would break that rule a little bit, and we would use those voting permits at that point in time to also come back and help with the support of the fish hatchery. So we would change where those dollars go.
Okay. All right. Citizens to be heard. Fanny Bates. Good morning, Fanny. We will need your name and address for the record.
My name's Fanny Bates. I live at 701 Northeast 15th. I've been coming to these city council meetings for quite a few years, and it has always bothered me that the vast majority of the city employees, the managerial people who come up here to speak to you, to explain things to you, are white males. I live in this city. I know that this is a very multicultural city. We have half the people here are female. A whole lot of the people here are racial minorities. And I have always wondered if there was some sort of a systemic problem in the hiring processes that go on in Oklahoma City that causes a bias in favor of white males when you're looking at managerial positions. Now, when I read in the paper this past week that one of your white male managers has been convicted of a pattern of sexual harassment, I was absolutely floored. And I was even more shocked, as far as I know, he's still on the payroll. And then one of your people who speaks for the city was saying that the city didn't know that he'd been accused of sexual harassment. This city needs to have a clear, unequivocal position where every manager in this city knows that sexual harassment and racial discrimination will not be tolerated. People like this need to be fired yesterday. And somebody that will be fair with all the citizens needs to be hired in their place. For teenagers to be treated like that by a city employee is disgraceful. Those kids are not going to forget that. That confuses a child when an adult in authority is allowed to sexually abuse them.
Yeah. Well, I said I wasn't coming back here anymore, so I repent for that. Okay, it's Deborah Gray, 712 Northeast 30th Street, Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, 73105. But anyway, I came here about the same thing she's talking about. I brought this issue to you, Skip Kelly, and I spoke about it in here, about him, the harassment that's been going on there.
We really can't talk about personnel issues here before this.
But I just want to know, is something actually going to be done? Because I saw him there yesterday when we were up at the pool, and I made my daughter leave.
Or some complaints about an employee, we really want to hear that. If you follow that information, we'd be happy to investigate that, and we will do that. We don't discuss...
We filed those already, and they weren't addressed at that time. So I want to know, are they going to be addressed and actually heard? Are we going to have a meeting on this somewhere where everybody in that neighborhood and people who attend that pool can tell you what's going to happen to them? And how, he sits back in there and discusses people that's in the pool.
If you have a complaint on a personnel
But I just
for
want
the
to know.
city manager,
We've
it
been
is
downtown
city
and
manager.
talked to the people that's over Parks and Recreation. We filed complaints. I've
Let's
talked.
be very clear on this, Deborah. If you have a complaint against an employee and you'd like to file that complaint, we want to know that, and we want to hear that. And if you have some knowledge...
Yeah, but nothing has never been done to this day on those complaints. They did go in one ear, out the other.
I don't believe that to be true. We have a personnel department that investigate things outside of the Parks Department, and if you want to make if you have knowledge and would like to make a complaint, we'd be very happy to go ahead and investigate those complaints. We want to know if there's some improprieties.
Yeah. Okay, are y'all going to open the pool back up? I want to know when for the kids to have free swim on Friday. That's the only indoor pool on the east side, that's closed. For free swim on Friday?
Deborah, you can ask the Parks Director those questions if you'd like. We're not here to answer your questions.
He's not going to tell us anything. He said, ask Larry Kelly, and that's impossible.
Okay. Thanks for coming down. We have executive session. We'll be back.